Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here again. Hope you had a good summer vacation. No. What we're going to do today, I thought we had a really productive conversation last time, and I've done some work since. I guess you could call this the definition of insanity. I've taken what you said and I've tried to capture it on paper, and I'm going to show you that in a little while at your instructions. I hope it goes. I mean, I hope you all understand this time that I'm not imposing anything on anyone. This is just me trying to be, secretary and recorder and capture the group's thinking. And if you don't like it, we'll tear it up. But I do have some words on paper that I'll share into the meeting. But I thought we'd start with, and where we'll pick up is where we picked up, what the group decided it would do, that we'd pick up with, let's get firm on our North Star, and then let's see if we can work backward from our North Star to some potential chapters for a potential report. And again, if that doesn't feel comfortable when we get going, you'll say stop and we'll stop. I want just to repeat, I'm facilitator. I'm not driving this bus. You guys are. But I thought maybe we'd get started. We were supposed to last time. Carrie very generously volunteered to, well, maybe I volunteered her, but she agreed to give us a little bit of a update. I know she's been, you explain to us, Carrie, I won't describe it properly, but her organization's been doing or commissioning a lot of public opinion research. And I think, the issue of what do parents think about accountability is super important. And I think we all have an idea about what parents think about accountability that kind of comes from, getting burned by the stove or whatever. But I think there's been a lot of work, as probably all of you know better than me, there's been a lot of work, trying to find out what's the best way to frame accountability for parents. And, are those views evolving in any way and that sort of thing. So Carrie is on top of that. And I thought she would take a few minutes to give us a little presentation. This is from her car is not only her living room, it's her classroom, seminar room. But give us a little presentation, and then we could discuss, and then we'll sort of go back to our regular scheduling programming of our discussion of our North Star and our chapters. Does that sound okay to everyone? Everyone down for that? Okay.
That worked.
And I know for sure that the people that are missing, this looks like a very small group. I'm pretty sure Robin and Robert are at the very least meant to be joining us. I think there are a couple of, Denise is not available. There's some other people, but Matt, but let's hope that the others at least show up. Not that you guys aren't great, but missing a few. So Carrie, I would say that unless anybody else has anything for the good of the order of getting going and what we're doing, I would say, well, let me give that a going once, going twice, 3 times. Anybody else want to weigh in for the good of the order of the process? Questions? Okay, cool. Carrie, floor is yours.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be with you today. So we have been running a poll with Echelon Insights since the very beginning of the pandemic. And what we wanted to do, as a parent activist and advocacy organization, many of us in our group are very familiar with the fact that while parent anecdotes are very powerful, they're easily dismissed. And we wanted to find a way to bring what we were seeing on the ground and feeling on the ground and what was being reported into our National Parents Council and by our affiliates on the ground, how we could really quantify that so that it would be taken seriously. I just want to kind of frame this a little bit. We'll go over kind of the methodology, where it came from, how we created it. But the most important takeaway, I'm always, obviously biased around thinking we have the best poll. But I think our poll is powerful because it's actually created by parent activists on the ground. And so it has been a bit preemptive in terms of asking the right questions, because these questions are created by folks who are doing organizing in neighborhoods and what they're seeing in the conversations that they're having and the problems they are trying to solve or they're struggling with. So from there, we go through a process with Echelon. We don't ask them to develop questions for us, but they help us frame them so that we can actually get the data we're seeking. But the questions themselves are actually created by parents on the ground. So I just want to kind of frame it and start it that way. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. Let's see here. Hold on just a second. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Great.
Oops.
She can be taught. Okay. All right. So I just want to, again, a little additional context. The data I'm going to give you is our data that came from the end of June. We waited. We did not do a poll in July. We are doing one in August. We kind of took a 1-month break. Many of us were doing rapid response, on the local, state, and federal level around the COVID-19 mitigation strategies for school reopening, and have been really focused around getting our leaders on all levels to listen to parents, but also listen to public health officials and scientists and doctors in terms of making decisions around what those mitigation strategies should look like, everything from masking to distancing, all of that stuff. So working with not just Secretary Cardona, but the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Surgeon General as a part of their stakeholder group, and giving a lot of input that way. So we did take a break. This poll and this data and this information is coming from the end of June, but there will be an update coming in just a few weeks. So in terms of the methodology, you can see, this is how we've run it. We began in 2020, early 2020, beginning in April, the end of April, with a sample survey of about 500, and then expanded the poll to do it instead of on a weekly basis, expanding it to a monthly basis and expanding the sample size. So you can see it fluctuates between about 1,100 parents to about 1,000 parents, which is, a good sample size for a national survey. It's also reflective of demographics, geographic areas, et cetera, to be reflective of the student population in America's public schools. So core topics and trends. Of course, the topic of our conversation here, you can kind of see the ebb and flow here. I'm wondering if you guys will pardon me for just a minute. I'm going to switch, because when we present this in Google Sheets, often you can see the numbers are kind of funky to look at. So forgive me for just a second. I'm going to switch to a different format.
That looks fine from my perspective, for what it's worth.
Yeah, the percentages don't come out correctly, so just give me one quick second to correct this and present it in the right. I promise you it will be worth it, because you will be able to see it
Cool.
in a better format.
You know, like when you make fun of John Bailey's haircut?
That's right.
He looks good. He's right out of Central Casting. Right.
Four other people have privately messaged on there. He must have looked really bad.
Wow.
Sorry. I was like, Zoom has really ruined all of our manners. I mean, imagine saying that in an actual public meeting.
I cut my hair today too. I don't get no love. It's like,
You
it's
look
all
good,
good.
You look great, John. You look like you're ready for office. You look great.
Exactly.
Yes.
More like you're running for office, and I think you
Yes,
have some
that's right.
product in there.
I will vote for you.
It's just, wow. Okay. I should have focus grouped the haircut before I got it.
No, because then it would have came out bad. You don't focus group here.
Well,
Even my wife
luckily,
was like,
oh,
go ahead.
luckily John's a man, so no one will really comment that much publicly on it. It's usually women, right? Okay, so this way you can see the percentages a little bit better. So again, it gets a little funky when you throw it into Google Sheets. I apologize. So in terms of support in regard to continued statewide testing, the question that was asked was, There's been some debate about whether or not schools should administer statewide academic tests this school year, even if neither one perfectly describes your views. Which of the following statements do you agree with more? So generally, we've seen this pretty steady. Like it's the tug back and forth between 51-49 back and forth on average. The question that we are asking internally at the National Parents Union around just asking parents around statewide testing is whether or not parents actually understand what it is, what it's used for, and also grappling with the fact that this has been heavily politicized. And there has been a lot of money, a lot of communications resources, an entire campaign built for years to get parents to think badly about diagnostic assessments. Do we actually understand what they're used for? How often they're used? How often they're done? How much time they take up? And also, you know, there a lot of the information that we get is around the stress it creates for students, and who is creating that stress, who is creating the environment that make our kids just crazy, allegedly, around with anxiety around this testing. So what we are actively doing and will be doing in the next year is actually testing different ways to talk about this, framing it as diagnostic assessment, and working, you know, on some of our wraps that we actually use on the ground when we talk about this, to better describe what it is. For instance, many of our organizers use the wrap around, you know, obviously, if you're taking your child to a doctor and your child's temperature is going to get taken by the pediatrician, if you freak your child out that the thermometer is going to hurt you and it's going to be very painful, and oh my God, like it's going to be the worst thing. And if you have a temperature and you're sick, it's going to be the worst thing that ever happened to you in your life. That may be creating some anxiety around having your temperature taken. So you will see more of it to come, or more testing around this issue to come. But this is really the raw question. Like, do you think we should move forward with assessment, statewide academic tests? But from where we sit, you know, again, you can see pretty clearly here, you know, generally, you know, between 7 to 9% of parents not really sure, but at least half of them, even in the midst of a pandemic, saying that they believe that this is important. The next question. In terms of rethinking education, the question we asked was whether or not schools should be focused on trying to get back to the way things were, shoving kids back in the box. Were you satisfied before? Or is this an unprecedented opportunity to innovate, to rethink how we teach kids? Should we be looking at, you know, the lessons that are learned here? And what we're seeing, and this is kind of the call that we have been making to all of our friends in ed reform, is that we really had an opportunity here with as many as 66% of parents, a pretty significant majority of parents saying, no, this is the time to rethink, to reimagine, to innovate in education. So we really had, and I'm saying had, a window of opportunity to have a conversation with parents about rethinking this stuff. And we can see that those numbers are dropping, and that window is closing. And this has been something that we've been using this poll to warn our friends, you know, in education reform, in districts, you know, those who are really trying to use this opportunity to say, you know, the status quo was not working before. How can we rethink? You know, again, like I do believe that there is some room still to have that conversation with parents, but the squabbling and the trust that has really been broken down, especially in the last few months, you know, that window is starting to close. So an important lesson we are learning in that. Something that we've been polling, you know, again, throughout the pandemic and testing as part of one of our campaigns is the idea of whether or not we should have a law that establishes a right to a high quality public education as a civil right, the same way that the right to vote is. And this, as you can see, continues to blow it out of the water, you know, as high as 81% of parents saying, absolutely, we should have a law that establishes the right to a high quality education as a civil right. And so with this, you know, what we're using this information to kind of inform our campaigns around is the idea that we need to define what quality education is. We need to really put pressure on a lot of our federal officials in terms of establishing that conversation. It's certainly a heavy lift to establish a civil right around high quality education. There's been some constitutional efforts. It's actually present in some state constitutions, but we do believe that utilizing this is such a strong point. Being able to quantify that and explaining to folks that unless we have diagnostic assessment, unless we have data, unless we have information, just like we have in the criminal justice system that informs us, where the inequities lie, if we don't have data, we can't define what quality actually is. And if you believe that having a civil right around a high quality public education should be established, like that language in and of itself, and that it polls so high, is very helpful in terms of our overall thinking about what that RAP should be on the ground and how we can use it to mobilize parents and the general public. Plans for next year. This is also very encouraging to us, but you can also see how the trends go up and down ever so slightly. We asked parents directly for the remainder of the school year ending in June, do you think that public schools should continue to offer a choice in terms of in-person or remote education? And then for next year, whether or not that choice should remain open to them. And again, a majority of parents continue to want to have the option to choose what's best for their kids. So when we're talking about the fact that, parents have been to the promised land of choice and options and have been empowered to make decisions around what works best for their child and for their family, this is not going to be toothpaste that is easily put back in the tube. So saying that, we're not going to give you an option to remain virtual if you're not comfortable sending your child back to school, not just because of COVID-19, but because your child has experienced, education in a way that is free from racism or free from bullying or free from distraction, or this has just worked better for your family. It's a great opportunity for us to use as a point of agitation, and again presents an opportunity for us to have a very different conversation with parents now that they have been to the promised land of options and choice. In terms of thinking about the next school year, how likely do you think your child is to personally experience the following as the result of the pandemic? Asking them specifically, having challenges academically or needing additional instruction or tutoring. 56% of American families saying that absolutely, very likely or somewhat likely. Having difficulty readjusting to the school routine, 55% of American families predicting that. Having trouble dealing with social situations, readapting to going to in-person learning, needing services to support their mental health and emotional well-being. Throughout the course of our poll, tracking right there with being worried about whether or not my child will contract coronavirus in a classroom is the social and emotional component. And really being able to provide parents with the assurance that that is going to be a top priority, and that parents can trust schools to actually engage with their children and make progress on that is going to be one of the challenges I think parents are really watching over the next year. We asked them very specifically, thinking about how COVID-19 has affected your child's schoolwork and classes this school year. Are there any areas specifically that you think your child may have fallen behind in or might need some additional support? So 35% of families saying, I don't think my kid's going to need any additional support, but math, ELA, science, history, right there. Parents will tell you very specifically what they're most concerned about and the areas that they'd really like us to focus on. So the idea that parents aren't paying close attention and don't have very specific worries about what their child is struggling with and what they'd like to see schools and educators directly addressing, it's a misconception that they're not paying close attention, because they really are. In terms of parent engagement and trust, I don't think that much of this data is going to be a surprise to any of you, but parents definitely feeling more involved. In total, about 64% saying that they feel more involved, and we kind of broke it out, in terms of whether or not their child is in person, going through hybrid or online. And I will tell you, throughout the course of our polls, the parents that are angriest, that are most afraid, that are most filled with fear are our hybrid parents, because it's just been such a mess going back and forth, or having 2 days in and 3 days out. Those are the parents that are really struggling at this point. It's a smaller percentage of the overall population that are still in hybrid, but those are the parents who are most worried and feeling the most stress. But obviously it makes sense that the folks that are online or have been engaged in hybrid models feel like they've been more engaged. But also of note, 58% of parents with kids that have been in person are also feeling more engaged. We asked whether or not this experience that they've gone through has been eye-opening. Do you believe that you know more about your child's education than you ever have before? 80% of parents saying that this is an eye-opening experience. So again, another opportunity to acknowledge that parents are feeling that, acknowledging the fact that, wow, you are awake and you have seen, what your child's educational experience is like. And you believe, again, 8 in 10 parents thinking that your child deserves to have a high quality education as a civil right. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to make sure they get that? It's an opportunity where you have really a united message from parents saying, we are awake. We have seen more than we've ever seen before. We believe that they should have access to high quality education. It's an opportunity for us to really engage them. We're always asking this particular question: who do you trust? It's very important to us as an organization, making sure that we know, we think we know, but really being able to quantify who do you trust to get information so that we can be in partnership with them to get the best information from a trusted resource, a trusted ambassador, and be that bridge to parents, but also being a bridge up to them as well, so that these decision makers are making good decisions based on information that parents are giving us directly. And frankly, what we're trying to do is just get out of the way and get parents in conversation with people like the Surgeon General, or with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, or Secretary of Cardona, so that they can tell their stories. But this is key to us in understanding really who are the trusted ambassadors of information, who should be disseminating what, and who do we need to be in conversation with. So obviously.
Okay, Carrie, can I ask a quick question about this slide? Have you thought about having like one of the options be myself, right? Like, who do you trust most? Me. I understand where you're coming from with this, but at the same time, like teachers always pull hot, totally get it, right? But I always feel like one of the things we're trying to impart to people is that the person whose opinion you should value most is your own, right? So I found this all fascinating. I'm just throwing that out there for you as a thing to think about with your next round of questions.
I love the difference between the teachers and the teachers union. That's delicious.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, this was very helpful and has been very helpful in our conversations with Miguel, because like saying, FYI, but I will say, Darrell, that's beautiful feedback. We're asking a lot of questions regarding self-determination in upcoming surveys. And I think it gets to that, but not as plainly. So I'm going to take that back and see what we can do with that. And, I think that's an interesting avenue to explore, because we are seeing, a new era of that self-determination, of people having more confidence. Because I think what I have been trying to say to a lot of folks is that they are underestimating the amount of deterioration in the relationship and trust between parents and families and communities, frankly, in the school system. Like, we have sat back and watched a systemic failure. Like, the system failed and then struggled and failed and then struggled and failed. And so we have always relied so heavily on the fact that, you know, frankly, by force, parents have to trust schools. And now that has been disrupted in an unprecedented way, because we literally watched this systemic failure of an entire system in our living room. And so now everything is being questioned. And you're seeing that play out where parents are feeling empowered, whether they're empowered and armed with misinformation or with good information. They're not just accepting the way that they had in the past. And that is something that we can see is going to continue. And it's a question of how do we get the right ambassadors with good information to inform these newly, you know, inspired and ready to engage parents with good information, so that they're making decisions based on, you know, a position, like not out of fear, but from a position of power, but they're doing it with good information. So like that's something that, you know, we view as our role as being really important, is making sure we get the right ambassadors that parents trust with good information. And because all of this is based on trust and openness and honesty. Even when you don't know something or something is evolving, admitting that to parents so that we can do this together, that's been key in building a lot of these relationships. So I think, I apologize, you know, that was word salad there, but you know, well said, good feedback. If there's any other feedback, please, we're open to that. But again, as folks are seeing here, you know, teachers still play a critically important role. Individual teachers, not teachers unions, you know, not even, it breaks the heart of some of our state chiefs to see that they are not in fact at the top of the heap. They actually don't have much of a relationship with parents and families and communities directly. Some of them are actually interested on how they can improve that, how they can have more, you know, direct connections, and some of us are helping with that. But it's really, you know, other parents, local district leaders, including superintendents and school boards, which I'm sure makes them feel good, but kind of like a reality check in terms of, you know, who are the right ambassadors for this information. The majority of parents, 62%, when they think about how much your child's school asks them for feedback or input, or whether or not they feel like they're a part of the process, 62% of parents saying they wish that schools ask them for feedback more. And this, to us, what we interpret this as is kind of that tendency to box check. And many parents are feeling as if they're allowed to weigh in only on the things that the school feels they need parent input on. And parents feel like there are other things that should be subject to discussion, and feel very frustrated at times that they're not brought into conversations that they think are very important around the education of their children. And you're seeing that play out in good ways and in bad ways, because parents are frustrated, they're scared. A lot of what we're seeing right now is organizing and activism out of fear of the unknown and not having good information. Not having it from trusted resources, and the breakdown of that relationship. And so again, while this is a painful time for many of us to watch kind of playing out, it's also an opportunity to hear that like parents are in a very wounded, afraid place. And we've got to acknowledge that. And there's got to be some restorative justice around that, like acknowledging that, wow, things didn't go well. And we've got to do better by our kids, and we want to engage with you, and we want you to be part of a co-collaborative creative process to reintegrate our kids back into the system if you're ready to do that. And if you're not, like, let's talk about what else that looks like. But 62% of parents wishing that schools were really seeking their feedback, their input, their participation.
Carrie, did you disaggregate this or ask like two separate groups with parents in schools of choice and parents in regular public schools? And was there any difference?
All of these kids are, or all of these parents are public school families.
So we don't know if like charter school families feel more involved. Yeah.
They
Okay.
are, well, we do have a breakdown. Well, charter schools are public schools. So
Yeah, fair enough.
we do have a breakdown of charter parents, so we could disaggregate that. And
It'd
take
be
a look at
interesting
that.
to know.
And then finally, like another important exercise we've gone through is asking about communications. And we, early in the pandemic, it almost felt like there was an over communication. Some parents were getting not enough communication, and like the lines were broken down, and many districts were not using trusted ambassadors and the right languages and all of that. We had to figure out some of that. Then we had parents that were over communicated to, like, we don't need constant like hourly updates on the state of your HVAC system. There are specific things that parents want to know about that are helpful to us, and we want you to tell us those things, and we weren't even hearing that. So we did a whole series of, what do you actually want to be communicated with about? How can we best communicate with you? So that what we really wanted to do is be a resource to folks and say, like, listen, this is what we're panicked about. This is what parents need to know. This is the information. This is the frequency. This is how you do it. This is when you do it, all of that. But overall, moving forward, when we take a look at, parents, 62% of them wanting to be more engaged, wanting to participate more, we asked the question, and we'll continue, online surveys, feedback forms, virtual online meetings, which have become very popular. Parents want to hold on to them. Less popular is, the paper surveys, the feedback forms, and, still some trepidation around the in-person meetings. But from what we're hearing anecdotally in the field, as well as what we're seeing reflected in the survey, 25% of parents really 26% of parents really interested in engaging through those town halls. And it has been an incredible tool. State chiefs across the country, we've been working with them and organizing, town hall meetings with, your state commissioner, your state chief. So you could sit with 1,000 parents. You don't have to hear through like the game of telephone from district leaders and superintendents and teachers unions. Some of these state chiefs came right to us and said, well, we need to actually hear from parents in our state or parents in this city. And what we've done is set up opportunities for them to be able to really get it straight from the tap, unfiltered, like, this is it. And so hopefully that's going to continue. But that's kind of just a little sliver of the data that we've collected. We're going to continue to do that. Like our survey will pick up again in August. We'll have more information to help inform. We'll be asking more questions. Open to any feedback, any questions, thoughts, ideas. Happy to.
So I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative. I'm sure others have questions. Red state, blue state. I thought it was really striking. It was hard to. I kept wondering, sort of on a lot of slides, is there a distinction? And I didn't. But just by the strength of the numbers for some of the things you wanted, like unhappy, didn't like to want to go back to the status quo. I didn't see much difference, red state, blue state, or evidence of red state. There's people who don't think there's any such thing as COVID. It doesn't seem to have, I didn't see any of that evidence there much. Did we ask that? Did we look at red state, blue state?
Yeah, so we've taken a look at things regionally, and now that we've done so many surveys, we can actually quantify a lot of that. So happy to share crosstabs with folks around certain questions and make that available to anybody who's really interested in taking a look at, specific regions of the country. We're a Unidos affiliate, so we stole their map and their regional breakout. So that's how we break it down. We also include Puerto Rico because we don't want to forget our friends in Puerto Rico. So we can provide any of that data if folks are looking at particular regions around certain questions. Again, charter school parents, we break it down through, what option they, like whether or not they've been in person, whether or not they've been remote, hybrid, et cetera. So there's an opportunity to look at that demographically, of course, as well. If you want to take a look at Latino populations or African-American populations or Asian population, like we can also have the capacity to look at that now too.
Super interesting. Others have questions, comments, input?
I got one thing. What is your, I noticed the one that's like, yeah, we want the world to change. Yeah, we want shit back the way it was. It spiked in like September, October, November last year, like right when it gets real, right? Like, what are your instincts on whether or not like the return to disrupted school will make that gap return again? Or do you think that was purely about, once in a lifetime, like school blown up like it was last year?
I would say, based on what we're seeing over the summer with the fight around masks and the fact that so many, like, honestly, the question we're getting right now is like, why aren't people talking about Delta? Are we going to be able to reopen the schools? Like, is my kid wearing a mask? And why don't I know this already? Like, that's the question that, like, again, with summer program, another thing that we're watching very closely too is, and literally just discussed this with the White House and with Secretary Cardona 2 days ago, we're seeing low rates of participation in summer programming that was supposed to save the day and help us with unfinished learning, but they didn't get their act together quick enough, didn't notify parents. Parents already had plans. They did not participate in summer programming. So we just wasted a whole bunch of ESSER funding on empty programs. And whether or not they were going to now go back to districts that had low rates of participation saying, well, your strategy or your roadmap to, mitigate unfinished learning is going to have to be updated because nobody was participating in like level 1. So all of that to say, parents don't operate in chaos. Like, we can't do that. Like, that's not how a family runs. And you got to give us some notice. And I think the grace period around some of the stuff saying like, well, we got to figure it out. Like, parents want the information now so they can plan. So like, if you're going to shut things down, or we're going to wear masks, or you're going to tell us how you're going to deal with like Delta and reopening, like, we want that information now. Schools are literally reopening now in some areas of the country, and will be reopening throughout this month and into next month. Like, you can't tell us 3 days before. That again is adding to the erosion of trust that parents have in the system, because it's quite clear it's a hot mess. So what I'm going to say is that we're going to see another spike of mistrust. We're going to see another spike of panic, saying like, oh God, I don't want this to go back the way it was because I don't trust these folks. So I wouldn't be surprised in seeing like additional concern, and frankly, continuing to see those numbers say like, we want choices, we want options, because we want the ability to have to pivot, because we can't trust that folks have this handled. Does that make sense?
Just so weird because it's just really weird because I think the public school system is usually so good about getting all these things done competently that just seems weird in this case that it's not working out at all.
Well,
So,
we all want to.
I don't appreciate your deadpan there, Christopher.
what do you mean? I'm totally serious, like totally being serious, Satire is playing it straight, Darrell. Satire is playing it straight. Carrie, one thing that I think about is a lot of this information, I think we're getting kind of poll fatigue, I think in some ways in organizations like mine, because it's coming from different places. But when you try and translate poll results into an action of some sort, or some sort of policy or some sort of specific thing, is where it starts getting really complicated. Like, what do you do for people? And even with the spikes of mistrust in parents, I think it may be that parents are looking for a solution, but not options. Like choice and options, those of us who are in the choice movement, who are thinking this is a moment to seize on choice. Actually, I think, even in my own family, like, it's not necessarily choice for choice sake that we want an answer. Like, where are our kids going to go next week? And a person who pops up even with a bad answer, like might be somebody. It's not really the choice that we want. It's just like, get these kids out of my house, get them into a place, get them into something normal and stable every day. So if my district were to marshal some sort of even a bad half step, I think a lot of parents would take it. Like, it wouldn't be the best bargain ever, but it's not the choice for choice sake that I wish parents would want right now. It's the help me do something, help me not have a problem right now.
We're here to operationalize data. Okay, so like, what's because I'm an organizer. You know, I don't like to poll for poll's sake. I don't say something unless like we're trying to create movement, right? So like some of what we've done with this poll is actually used it to create things like our Bill of Rights for school reopening, to literally say 87% of parents support having individualized education plans to mitigate unfinished learning, so that there's something actionable that organizations can go out and say, like, how are you going to ignore 87% of families that want you to use this ESSER money to create individualized education plans to figure out where our kids are and how we're supposed to get them there? And how are you going to do that without a diagnostic assessment? How do you even know? What are you going to guess? Like, so what we're trying to do is ask parents the questions like our plan, you know, coming up in the fall is you're going to see us mobilize around school board accountability campaigns on the ground in several cities where parents are saying, okay, you only wanted to box check us. You did not want to really engage us in a process around how we're going to use this ESSER money. Well, we've literally polled on the ground, and parents in Denver, parents in Atlanta, parents in Minneapolis have said that they want their top 10 priorities around how you spend this money is individualized education plans, social emotional learning, targeted tutoring, all of these things. And they've got a list of 10 things and saying like 87% or 86% or whatever the percentages are in that city, to make it actionable, to give them something to hold them accountable for, so that they're not stuck. And honestly, if the school boards are not willing to make that investment and make those changes, that's where we see the opportunity to have a conversation around, well, these guys aren't even going to do the basics around what we know is actually going to overcome unfinished learning. There's other options. Like, do you know everything? And is this the best thing? Like, if they're not going to do right by you, who is, and how do we move? So that's kind of like, you know, I know that folks are getting that polling fatigue, but what we're trying to do is use this to kind of inform the field around the assets they have on the ground that they don't often see, because they have parent support around a lot of this stuff, but then using it so that our affiliates on the ground have something that's actionable that they can go to the board and say, like, listen, we're not just an angry mob. Like, these are the solutions and best practices we know work, and here's how much support you have, and giving them like no space to do anything but right. And if they don't, then, you know, we already have, you know, a group of folks mobilized to hold them accountable. That's how we look at it.
I know we're touching tactics a little bit, and I've just been like really derailed the last week and a half, but I've been wanting to write a piece that is just like, as a parent, these are the 5 things you should ask for from a school district when you go back, right? You know, the first thing you should ask for is some certainty, which I think everybody was talking about. I think that's like super important. Like, 1 million families are in the lurch in New York City right now. That's not going to get sorted out easily, you know? And it was like an assessment from my kid, a tutor from my kid, you know, like, or whatever the other things are. So I would love to know what your like top 10 list is. I think it's really awesome. The other thing, just because you mentioned Denver, so, you know, we have like, we're doing stuff on school board races there on the other side of the 50 can house. And I was just like, you know, your campaign should be about trust, right? Can I trust you to X as a school board member? And it's all the stuff that we want from our ESSER, right? Can I trust you to spend the money? Can I trust you to make sure my kid gets a tutor? Can I trust you to, you know, all the way down the list? So I don't know if anybody else is looking at that too, but that's something we've been considering.
We should talk more offline about that, because literally what we're doing with our affiliates on the ground is like they're all they came together in a process to say, like, what do we actually want, and let's test this, let's poll this to see if what we're feeling on the ground is right around these things that we want people to spend ESSER money around, like these best practices. So it came from the ground up. We tested it, got consensus, can see like across the country, this is, yep, we're right. This is how parents are feeling. And now we are creating campaigns around, here are 10 things we expect to see in the classroom. Here are 10 things we expect to see district-wide if you're spending this money right. And so what parents have done is they've organized, they literally, it's kind of like our Bill of Rights. We had a marching document, because we cannot just be the angry mob. Like the angry mob, like once you get there and you win a seat at the table and they pat you on the head and say, oh, okay, what would you want? If you don't have an answer that's sharp as hell, they're like, beat it. And it's all for naught. So we don't send anybody into battle without a sword and a shield. And literally they're taking these 10 things and they're blowing them up on foam core and they're marching into these school boards, or they're marching into, like we did it in Massachusetts, in Malden, the State Board of Education, and literally put it up on foam core. Can you see us? Like, here, keep this. Put it up in your office, Jeff, because this is what we're going to be looking for. Oh, and by the way, our friends at Georgetown, Marguerite, at Genomics Lab, we're going to be checking. So we're not just going to, you're not just going to say, oh, this is adorable, thank you so much for your feedback. Well, we're actually going to do our own independent audit about how you're spending this money. And we're going to give you a report card about how we feel about it. So like if you don't want to engage with us and you don't want to be collaborative, like there's going to be accountability on the other side because we're going to be watching. So that's what's been key, is like coming in, being willing to make friends, coming in with a solution, not just being angry and critical, but saying, this is bad, here's what we want you to do. But at every point, like we can play good cop or bad cop. Like, do you want to be friends, or do you want to go to federal court? Like, what do you want to do? So that's been key. And I think like our next step is literally taking it to the school boards who've been whining about a lot, like, what can we do? It's so tough. Well, you know, we want them to know that they're under the microscope and we're watching.
So, Carrie, one question, and maybe pretty soon we should move on to our discussion. But you know, I originally was interested in sort of how parents think about accountability, and you make a really interesting jump back from every slide almost to this means they want accountability. You know, they want individualized tutoring. Well, that must mean they want diagnostic testing, because you can't do individualized tutoring without diagnostic testing. Do they make those leaps? Like, do they know they want individualized tutoring? Do they know that means diagnostic testing? I mean, you know, this goes back to kind of the conventional wisdom that they hate diagnostic testing. Are you, I mean, not to be, you know, is this wishful thinking that they really connect this back?
I think that what we have seen on the ground in 17 cities is that if you ask the right questions, like parents are led to, well, how are we going to know? Like, how do you know what your kid needs? Like, again, we always go back to the doctor. Like if you bring your kid to the doctor, like, how do you know what's wrong? Like, how do you know how sick they are? How do you know how much medicine they need? Do you know if they're sick or not? Like, if this is normal, not normal, like, how do you know any of that if you don't use like some kind of diagnostic tool to say like, this is right? And we can talk about whether or not the tool is right, whether or not you're using that ear thing or you're using a thermometer, like parents get it. Like, but we also have to acknowledge that we have had probably two generations of campaigns and indoctrination to get them to hate this. Like, it's logical that they don't like it because we don't ever try to acknowledge the fact that like the language we use is poisonous. Kind of like the word education reform. Nobody likes that word. Nobody likes it, but we still use it. We still poll around it. We still poll around statewide testing, or like, we don't even evolve the language knowing that like the well has been poisoned. We cannot go back. We must change it, how we talk about it. So that's what we try to do on the ground, is like, you got to update your rap. If something's not working, you don't say it louder. You don't continue, like, that's not how this works. You've got to change like the thought pattern around it. So for us, you know, we're education justice advocates, right? And we work side by side with criminal justice advocates. We talk about the school to prison pipeline. And so for us, it's like, well, how do you determine that there's injustice in the criminal justice system if you don't have data? And do we just stop using the data if it makes the cops feel bad? No, of course you don't. Like, how do you reform something if you don't have data? How would we do something in the education system if we don't have data to inform like what's good and what's bad? It's not the test. The test doesn't create inequity, it reveals it. That is the bottom line of what we're trying to get folks to understand.
Okay, you're gonna write the accountability chapter. I'm only kidding. I'm thinking
God.
chapters.
Well, you better name it something other than the accountability
Yeah, I
chapter.
know. The diagnostic testing chapter.
That's
Go to
kind
the
of like
doctor chapter.
the book of Revelations. Nobody wants to read it. They like to read everything else except for that book. So.
Carrie, are there any
Carrie?
places where parents are being engaged well or thoughtfully, or like an example of like what this could look like over time?
Yes and no. It depends on the level of existing organizing that has happened on the ground. So in areas that are well established, where we have marched on the boss 10 times and shown up with a couple thousand parents and put the hammer down and can pick up the phone to a state chief and being like, do you want us to shut your building down, or do you want to just put 5 of us on your school reopening task force? Like where that kind of power is on the ground, engagement's pretty good because they know what they're going to get. But in areas where it hasn't, it's box checking, it's the BS, and that's where you're going to see, you get the same old. So there are some good examples of, and frankly, like it's been refreshing to be in conversation with like CCSSO because there are some like radical state chiefs that are like, we do this so bad. And there's so many gatekeepers to parents, and where they want to blow by that and really like get into it with parents, like, who do you want to talk to? But you better be ready for some feedback. Folks that are open in that way, it's gotten better. Even in places where that parent power isn't on the ground, if you have a state chief that's like ready to engage in that way and kind of that radical disruptive relationship building, and acknowledges like the past trauma that these parents have gone through, that's where you can do something that's not transactional but transformational.
And where are those places? So like, where are you like, okay, there's some exciting work happening, or at least the beginning of it?
So I want to say like Penny in Tennessee. I want to say some of our folks in Colorado have been successful. I want to say that in Massachusetts, it's been somewhat successful. California is a disaster. There, like I can point to places that are problem children in particular that we could hold up as like the evildoers, like do not do this. And then some places where there's been like deep engagement. Minnesota too, like Coolio has been right in the mix because Coolio, has the ability to say like, fail to engage me at your own peril. Like, and she has that kind of weight. So like, again, there are some strong places that I think have done some important work, but it's not great.
Gary, I wasn't clear on how much polling you've done on the hot question of the day, school opening and opening safely, and how to make sure that happens, and what parents think about vaccine mandates or testing requirements or masking requirements or all of the above, and what they think about political interference with these decisions, such as Republican governors who are constraining local authorities from making decisions about these things. Any stuff you've got on that? I would love, if it's public domain or conveyable.
I will send it to you. I intentionally left it off this. Like, this is just like Tamara asked me.
Yeah, I
just
focused her accountability. Yeah.
Oh, no, I
I want to talk about vaccines. Who should get vaccinated? Should it be the teachers first? Should it be the parents first? Like, we get into the weeds. Like, we really get very specific. Like, do you think that all teachers should be vaccinated before you're ready to put your kid back? Like, we really get into that. So I will send you all of that information. Like, you can dig even the crosstabs if you want to take a look at different demos, but ton of that, because it's been helping to, I think, inform national conversation, kind of steer it a little bit. Because a lot of folks, like, again, speak anecdotally around what parents want, and there's a ton of polling, but we also have the ability to track it from the very beginning and asking these questions and how it's been evolving. So I think that's helpful too.
Okay, so let's have, if there's 1 or 2 more questions, let's have them, but if not, let's pivot. Are there questions?
Can I give credit to John too, because John was on this magic carpet ride with us at the very beginning. And he actually added a bunch of the economic questions that we were at, and had a lot of great input and insight when we were first doing this at the beginning of the pandemic. So John, I don't know if you want to jump in. You were like at the beginning of this
No,
process.
no, it was, I mean, credit goes to Carrie, and also, I mean, Walton early in March of last year was trying to say, like, what could they do early in the pandemic? And, to their credit, like Sternberg and Christine and Romy, like, bought the line that we, like, when there's so much uncertainty and so much unclarity, that getting some ongoing parent polls so you could see trends and try to see a little bit further ahead. And Carrie's got this is the longest parent poll that's been out there, gauging trends, engaging like preferences and needs and wants and fears and hopes and concerns. And so it's a really, really rich source of data that I think folks are just wrestling with. She just gave you a tip of the iceberg. She just mentioned that, but it's like true. There's so much more behind the scenes there. And the crosstabs are, and the folks who don't know, Kristen Soltis Anderson who heads up at Echelon and does the sort of technical part. I mean, she's a real rock star in this stuff too. And she uses a lot of the data from MPU's poll as part of her sort of broader work in communications too.
And she's even like Nate Silver has referenced it. Like there's a whole bunch of folks like that have looked at the poll that like will validate like the fact that it's really solid. So we're super proud of it and proud of the fact that parents had a lot of input into creating it. But again, like John was saying, kudos to Walton, because we didn't have the money to pay for it at the beginning. They were already thinking about it. We went to them and said, we really need to do this. Like, we don't have the resources. So they gave us that runway to be able to, and once we saw like that the idea blossomed, we were able to get some additional funding just to keep it going. Cause I really feel like it's such an important tool for all of us if we're willing to engage with it and look at it. I mean, we even ask questions around George Floyd. We ask questions around whether or not we should have cops in schools, like all the stuff that bubbles up from like questions that you may have in the back of your head, like email me. We probably have asked the question because we're feeling it on the ground already. And happy to share it and have you guys look at it.
Great. Okay. Super interesting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks to Walton. Thanks to you. So let's we're an hour into our time. Let's at least get started on our kind of the meat and potatoes conversation. And then we'll take a break sort of in the middle of it. I mean, we take a break now, but then we might never get any momentum again. So I just want to repeat again, like, this is not Tamar Jacoby's outline. This is just me trying to capture what you all said in the last meeting. I'm sure the wordsmithing, I did occasionally try to turn a sentence fragment into a sentence. I'm sure I got some things wrong in the wordsmithing. So, anything wrong, we'll cross out, we'll change, we'll throw out the whole document. Please do not, I feel a little burned from last time when I prematurely offered you a document. So I hope it's now right time to offer you a document, and let's see, let's talk about it a little bit. So I'll share the screen. Let's hope I have the screen. Okay, so what I did is I did what you all suggested last time, and maybe this should have been a PowerPoint. Maybe it would be easier to read. It's a page and a half, and it kind of starts with an overall frame, and then there's kind of a section on.
Mark, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Could you make the font larger?
I sure can. Tell me when to stop. More?
Sorry, yes.
Okay. More?
I can read that now.
Okay. So it starts with the frame, then it kind of goes to some things we all believe that are, sort of a credo that kind of support the frame. The frame is meant to be sort of one big idea, and then a bunch of sort of ideas that support the frame, and then some potential areas that we could address with chapters. Oh no, and now here I have to answer my doorbell. 1 minute, I'll be right back. You can start to read the top. I'll be right back. That's what you're taking. That's what you're reading. Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. Very bad timing. So do you need me to sign? Hold on, I'll be right back. How we gave that up? Here. Sorry. So this is the, you know, the big frame takeaway that I took away was, you know, we can't go back to the status quo. The enemy is the status quo. And that the pandemic offers us a lifetime opportunity to reboot. We can't afford to slide back to the old status quo. We need to aim higher. We need to build back better. It's not good enough to spend more on the same old, same old. We need a radical leap forward. I mean, you guys can all read, but you know, among the biggest obstacles to change that's needed, and this was Chris's, you know, nice way of framing it, the old reductive belief that one size fits all, that we have a great system and it works for everyone. And so, and then, I mean, I can tell you who said all these things. Next is Will. You know, we need a new way of organizing, and you laid out some really interesting principles that should go into that reorganization. We talked last time about needing an enemy to kind of organize around, like the status quo. And then, you know, I think we want to get some discussion of race, even in here at the top, sort of urgency into the frame. So why don't we start there? Why don't we talk about this before we get into some of this, all the rest that we believe? How do people, does this reflect what people, you know, remember saying? I mean, I took it from a transcript, right? But you might have changed your mind, and maybe the transcript didn't capture things, or maybe I got it wrong. You know, how do you feel about this as our, this is sort of like what will be in our introduction. It doesn't solve all, it doesn't answer a lot of things because it doesn't say what change we want totally, but it gets us started. I'm seeing a lot of faces with no reaction. Smile or frown, do something.
I'd like to see us go
Mark.
broader. Oh, sorry, I talk over somebody.
Go ahead, Andy.
Well, Kenny, if you got to jump too, I want to make sure we get to. I just like to see us go broader and link this to broader issues. I feel like we have no shortage of manifestos about education. I'm interested in it, like, you know, you've got the idea of a road to a more inclusive economy runs through K-12. I think that's like totally, like, from where I sit, totally real and important. I'd like to almost see that like at the top. Like,
that's your sentence. That's your sentence.
Yeah, here's all this education stuff. Like, and now we're going to talk about why it matters more generally. Like, start with the more general, like put us into that broader slipstream. I just feel like traditionally education reform gets more traction when it's like tied to these big tectonic issues rather than like, here's all the stuff education people care about. Oh, and by the way, it might matter to these other things. And these other things happen to be like pretty big for people's lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I mean, don't take this as like what's going to say in the paper. This is just for us to rally around, right? I mean, somebody else is going to write this. I'm not going to write anything. You guys are going to write it. But yeah, fair enough. Good point. I mean, I'm not suggesting that this is not going from me to the printer. This is just for us to organize our thinking.
I appreciate the like first draft to be able to react to. I respond better to positive framing. So I'm just going to give you my perspective around that. I think that there is an opportunity, like the line around the enemy is the status quo. I'm not sure how many people even, you know, that's a very edgy speak terminology, and we use it a lot, and it means different parties in different communities. And so like either just directly call out but it doesn't, it starts out in a way that excludes people from being able to be a part of this conversation, when I really feel like that what we're trying to do is figure out what are the big opportunities we have to bring as many people together as possible. So that's one piece. The second one is I agree with Andy. Like for me, what COVID taught is that we can make tectonic shifts much quicker than we thought we could, and in any industry, whether that, you know, be how we did the pandemic EBTs. Like if we really prioritize our love for children, what does that look like in action is what I'm really interested in, like us writing around.
That's good.
I like Kenya's notes on positive framing. I think I might go in the opposite direction on that, though.
You were the guy. You were enemy is the status quo comes from you.
You know, I mean, it kind of is. It's like the enemy is the building. No, I just think that we need to be more explicit about, I don't want to say the failure, but the complete and utter failure of the American K-12 system after over the last year, right? Because this isn't a command merely about education, right? Like moms couldn't go to work, right? I mean, like there were economic and social implications. I mean, there was just so much tied up in this, right? So the call to something better has more sweep to it than it has had in the past, precisely because the areas of our lives that have been affected by the last year and a half, whatever, are so it's all of them, right? It's not just how we would normally think about education. So I just want to like toss that out there. You know, it's a couple of notes, but I don't think we should leave that on the shelf. This isn't just like a nation at risk even, right? This makes a nation at risk seem like it was overstating the problem. Given the evidence that we have from the last like year and a half, not to mention everything that happened before. So
Well, we are not actually in like fundamental disagreement on this. I actually think that, like, I try to think about it in, if there was a train like that was driving our society forward, what we realized with COVID was that education was actually further up in importance on like our economy, on the way that we're the role in the workforce than we ever thought before.
Yeah, that's well said. That's a great analogy too. Yeah.
I mean, it's a question of whether you want to. It's a question of what the mood of the reader is going to be. Is reader going to want more like we're all in this together, or is reader going to want some finger pointing? Carrie's polling would sort of suggest to me they all feel stuff is broke. You know, certainly half of them feel stuff is broken too. So it's hard. You know, it's hard to know. Half feel it's broken, half don't feel so. Others?
I feel like you gotta balance kind of the moment and the future vision. So a lot of the polling is around the current pain. I don't know where that's going to end because we're going to go up and down with roller coasters, it feels like. So we're going to be playing with people's emotions for a few years here. Yeah. And I think people are going to get angry and hostile about the roller coaster. But in terms of casting a bigger, broader vision, some of the things I do like here, you know, I think we got to add the word training to education. Like education is a catch-all for things, but I mean, you know, if people are going to have opportunity and jobs, and we're going to have an opportunity agenda, and we're going to have a future where there's a place for everybody. I'm kind of moved by this recent, you know, article about the Bobos or whatever, you know, like the idea that there has to be a place for more than just the educational elite. Then I start thinking the things like the educational training, the opportunity language, the CTE stuff, all of that gives people hope that there will be a pathway for them, because things are changing right now so much to where the usual pathways seem broken for folks. They're already going to be dispirited and lacking hope. There just has to be some language around a pathway for everybody.
Yeah, there's a lot of that coming, or at least pathway, CTE. I mean, you're certainly talking to the converted on that. That's what I do for a living.
Well, good. So you agree with me. That makes you brilliant in this case. See, see, we agree. That makes us all brilliant.
But there's definitely we'll get to that. That's coming. But I see your point. It could be up here too.
Well, I don't know who added the line. I think maybe you said it was Andy, but you know, the path to something leads through education.
Yeah.
I really like that. That visual, like the visual.
You know, I'm sorry, I cut somebody off.
Go for it.
Yeah, just to Chris's point, I can remember at the start of this of the last presidential cycle, or maybe we were like a year and a half into it, there were lots of people who are normally strong education people, like David Brooks, like whoever that, like Tom Steyer maybe, or whatever the hell it is. And they were all writing like, yeah, maybe education is not that important. you know, or like maybe it's not what we thought it was, or maybe we overemphasized it in the past. And so like I like Chris's point about being like, no, we had it right the whole time. like you guys are actually the ones who bailed on it too early as like the, you know, the main thing of all of this.
You know, I mentioned that article, the Bobos. I should look for it and drop it in because I think it's instructive. I didn't think I was liking it for most of what I was reading, but the last, it's by David Brooks, and the last paragraph, actually, Darrell, I think he is saying almost exactly what you just said. That the creative class and these big cities with the creative class and the whole Silicon thing and all that created kind of a techno elite, a new elite, and a cognitive elite, and all the Ivy League stuff. But the guy who needs to buy a house and a truck where I live in kind of the more rural areas is still going to need to have a place in America. And right now, that's one of the most disillusioned class of people. So you mentioned education to that guy, and that guy thinks you're talking about the elite stuff and the elite people, not a pathway for him to getting a truck and a house. You know, years ago, it was like a chicken in every pot. Now it should be like a Ford F-150 in every driveway. Conversion of language. Don't use that because I don't want everybody going to buy big expensive trucks.
I don't even have a license. I don't even have a license, Chris. I could buy one if I wanted to.
All right, well, we'll work on that with you, Darrell.
Let's keep going. Let's look at what we believe, and then we'll sort of circle back, but just to sort of feed some more fuel into this fire. So again, these are all your words. There's a couple. This is the longest section. This is Francis. All students have innate gifts and talents. We need a K-12 system that helps students identify and develop their passions, interests, talents, and skills. Carrie added, among the things parents want most, individualized attention for their child, a plan that helps their child be all they can be. Back to Francis, all students should feel loved, seen, and valued, regardless of their race and background. More Francis, it should not be possible to predict a child's educational outcomes on the basis of their race or socioeconomic status. And again, what I'm thinking of is this is sort of things these are the principles that I would argue we all agree on that sort of form the basis of our frame, and that, you know, we'll tweak them, whatever, but that's what I'm sort of imagining here. What brings us together? Our goals, Ian's point, the education system should aim to do more than close the gaps between racial groups. The goal should be 100% for all students. A lot of people made the point about K-12 education should go beyond academic achievement. And we had a rich discussion of that. Academic achievement is essential. There's no either or, but what's needed doesn't end there. Among the things we need more of, attention to social and emotional skills, supports to help students dream big and give them the confidence they can achieve those dreams, helping an approach centered on helping students become all they can be. Again, these are all just really direct quotes from you all. And then we had a kind of a long discussion about, you know, does choice solve that problem? And maybe one way to use choice to solve that problem, you know, the need for that balance. Maybe one way to use choice to address that balance is that baseline academic achievement standards, that you have baseline academic achievement standards for all schools and all students, but also a choice-based system that allows parents and schools to make decisions about what else is needed in addition to academic instruction. I'm guessing there's still a lot of discussion to be had about that. I'm guessing that you're not all on board for that, but maybe you are. That was sort of what I took away from, that was one view expressed by a few people last time. Back to Carrie, what parents care about most are outcomes. Schools should be driven and measured by a vision of desirable outcomes. And this is Robert. I don't know how many people agree with this. Teachers may or may not know how to close achievement gaps. They may need help, tools, and guidance. And, you know, this is Robert's point. Again, I sort of had some qualms as I wrote it because I don't ever want to say, you know, temper your expectations. But his point was sort of, while much should be expected of them, any new vision should be realistic about what they can and can't do. So do people want to react to these? I mean, again, this is not like stuff we're going to put in a paper necessarily. This is just for us to start to feel, do we have some common beliefs? Do we have something to work from? Do we sort of agree on some, you know, is this an area we can start from, as we craft more specific, chapters, suggestions, blah, blah, blah. This is just to kind of bring us together. This is like can we all like touch gloves and say that we're on this team?
So there's two things that I'll point out that I'm not on board with. So the first one is the line, the system should do more than aim to close the achievement gaps. The goal should be 100% for all students. In that sentence, I'm good with the last part. The goal should be 100% for all students. I don't think it needs the precursor. I don't think it needs the argumentative precursor to it, because it's not a uniting precursor to that sentence, but I'm absolutely on board with where it lands as like being the main thing.
Yeah, okay.
Second,
And again, we're not going to publish this. This is just for us to talk, but that's fine. I mean, this is helpful.
I'm literally talking, like I'm
Yeah.
just
Okay.
actually doing
Okay.
that.
Okay.
The second one, I would decouple choice from our achievement orientation, because I think they're meant to, choice to me is just a human right. I don't think that it's about achievement or achievement standards. So I'm on board with the achievement standards, and I'm on board with choice separated and decoupled from each other, because I think they serve different purposes. And I can't say 100% of what's sticking out to me, but it feels like to me, there's somewhere it will go if they're connected to each other. That is an unintended consequence that I think will disable choice.
Yeah, so I want to agree with the second thing, which is that choice and accountability should be decoupled. Maybe that's a better word, or choice and measurement, whatever. And overall, like, there are a couple of places in here that are sticky for me, but I'm happy to thorny is what I mean, but I'm happy to talk them through. We don't have. I feel like we should more explicitly say something about career in here as a goal, because that's something a lot of people care about as a value, and career is a proxy for my child is respected and can be a good citizen and raise a family and all of that stuff. So throwing that one out there. And then the one thing, because I'm remembering Ian saying this, and it's sort of on the opposite side of this, like 100% of what? I think is the question, right? Which is sort of like lives on the outside of all these things, right? It sort of like confronts the idea of what our baseline would be, right? It challenges the idea of measuring success, right? So it's like we want everybody to be, like equally capable, like as my words for 100%. But to do what? I think that's kind of like an open question when we get into it some more. So
yeah, I think that's maybe what I've been struggling with this document, which is what is the goal, and are we putting the full onus of everything on K-12? So even a line which says an inclusive economy runs through K-12. Sure, yes, but it also runs through, strong families, strong policy. Like there's a lot of things that a truly inclusive economy depends is that we are.
You're going in and out.
Realistically,
you're going in and out. You're going in and out.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
The basic point is, all of us have seen many reports about, how education is the thing, it's the common pathway. And so even lines like, an inclusive economy runs through K-12, that is certainly partially true, but an inclusive economy is dependent on a lot of, revitalization of some very key institutions, faith institutions, families, government policy. So part of it is, what is the goal that we want to articulate for K-12 specifically, that is unique to this institution? And maybe that's what I think I've been struggling with is in this conversation. Because 100%, even I tie it to literacy, because I tie it to try like the thing that I think we should hold K-12 accountable for. Because there are a lot of things that K-12 is held accountable for, which places, a huge onus, and then we say we fail. It consistently fails at all the things that we're saying it should do when, and we let other institutions off the hook. So I don't know, I think I'd benefit maybe from a little bit more of the goal conversation about what we are saying. We're saying K-12 itself is uniquely responsible to achieve. I don't know if that's helpful. But.
So let's go to the chapters, because a lot of what you're suggesting is actually what in the chapters, and so maybe I just separated it too much. So here's sort of here's your point, Ian. Maybe again not framed properly, but no school's an island. Students are shaped by what happens out. So this is my idea of 4 chapters that again I think I heard from the and I'm they're sort of all end in a question mark, if you notice, but the chapters would sort of address these questions. No school's an island. Students are shaped by what happens outside the classroom, and schools can be a powerful lever of change in their communities. How should we approach this? What's our vision? You've just framed it better. What's the specific role for schools? But that's exactly what it's your issue that I'm trying to get at here. And this, what's interesting to me about this is that what I've heard in the group is both left and right saying like the school doesn't end at the classroom wall. Either the inputs or the outcomes are much bigger, and that would involve like talking about what's the role of the school. But so I'll just go through these quickly. I mean, again, this is my idea of sort of 4 buckets that could become chapters, 4 big questions that could become chapters. The promise of choice and the limits of choice. More choice will remedy a lot of what's wrong with the system, and we want to expand choice dramatically, but it won't fix everything. How should we approach that? What's our strategy for expanding choice and for dealing with the questions it doesn't answer? Some of that comes from Andy, a lot of different people, but Andy kind of woke me up to some of this. We need to hold schools accountable, but how? How do we reframe accountability? I guess not even using that word, so that it's acceptable, even embraced by teachers and parents. I think Carrie gets to write this. The answer is talk about doctors. I'm kidding, but that's an important chapter. When parents talk about outcomes, a lot of what they mean is career outcomes. What's our vision for integrating career pathways in K-12 education? So, I mean, these are, again, just 4 really broad buckets for like how we could go about organizing a report. I'm sure you have other ideas. This is just, again, kind of, what I heard. But I mean, this is sort of the point of the document in a way, right? Like we want to start to, we can wordsmith exactly what we agree and don't agree on. We will wordsmith that. This was just an effort to get something on paper. But what I'm really hoping is that in this meeting, we start to agree that we're going to have some chapters. That we're going to have, I mean, we can decide, we can talk about it. Maybe still there's an issue. Are we going to have a report? And then we can talk about, are we going to have chapters? And then we can talk about, are these the chapters? And then we can talk about who wants to be part of writing these chapters. And the next step would be like a next meeting, ideally, some of these teams, like left-right teams that would take on chapters would come back to us with outlines. So, like if it turns out to be, I mean, the 2 people I've heard talking about the area outside the school, I'll just throw this out, are you, Ian, and Denise isn't here, but Denise on the left. If you 2 became the team that was going to write the Beyond the School Walls chapter, next meeting you would come back to us with an outline. What's going to go in it? What do we think? What are some of the issues? So take the pen away from me, other people would start to come with pens. And yeah, go ahead. I'm not sure who that was.
Mark, can I throw one thing out there just for your and the group's consideration is that so we got to talk. I think we have to talk about talent, right? So we got to talk about teachers at some point in here, but I don't think it's just about what we want from teachers in a classroom. Like one of the things, like, forgive me for talking about this way, right? Like teachers as entrepreneurs, right? Like teachers as people participating in a market of education, right? That is like, individualized and has tutoring and all these other like professions in it. Like you run a pod, right? Like you lead a micro school, you have a product, right? You came up with reconstruction.us, right? Like there's a more dynamic world in which we want A, great teachers, and B, we want them to like, create things, right? And that parents can pick and use and all that other stuff. So this like, almost like the challenge, the responsibility and the dynamism of teaching in this world that we want. Like, I think we gotta address that explicitly.
Got it. Yeah, got it. Interesting. Yeah.
I want to come back to Ian's point though on this, because I also am one of the folks that focuses on out of school time and community-based solutions, and kids are in school a sliver of their life, but there are other things that we can do. So if I were to agree with Ian, which would be painful for me to do, but but I might do it for once. It would be a chapter around kind of enabling institutions to what we could do to clarify, like, the big focus of this document or this thing that we're doing is what schools can do. That's like, or what education could do. But to have a chapter on enabling institutions or alternative, maybe not even alternative or counter institutions, but what's the word? Ancillary institutions?
I mean, some people use mediating institutions. Like
mediating institutions, yeah. So, which in some case, each of those institutions themselves could be writing a document like this at some point, hopefully.
Absolutely, and they should be. I mean,
they should be, yeah. So
Yeah,
Ian, I'm gonna agree with you.
You guys are assigned. Ian and Chris can write this chapter. We're done. We're done.
Lord have mercy on our souls, but we tend to agree on this point, or at least that frame for me, because I could see, like, to me, out of school time includes a lot of supportive institutions that could help this entire document do better, like be well,
So, okay, so could you guys, I forget, I don't have in front of me when the date of the next meeting is, but could you guys, and this is just a model of what I'm going to ask other teams to do, could you communicate with each other in between now and the next meeting and just see if you could start to come up with an outline for a chapter, like what goes in it, and like, and run that by the rest of us, sort of just like this, and we'll
totally.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. And if you want, my suspicion was that Denise might want to play a part in that. If you want to rope her in, it's up to you. I mean, if you guys want to go at it yourselves, that's fine. But that'd be great.
I mean, let me give you one example of just like how I think about this. So the Espinoza case that was decided in the Supreme Court last year is an interesting example of how religious institutions, based on that case, can now play a much greater role, or potentially play a much greater role in becoming a character formation, more of a character forming institution for the rising generation, because they now have a greater ability to potentially access public dollars for schools. So it may be that the frame is, how do we bring in the mediating institutions for the purpose of educating the rising generation? So it's the intersection point. So it's not only that we need more religion generally as a country, which one might believe, but it's what is the appropriate role for faith-based institutions in achieving the objectives to educate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, you guys should, it's good to have a preview, but what I would suggest is, since we got you guys working now, you should become the subcommittee and you should bring it back next time. And we'll then sort of lay out a vision that you guys have kind of come together around. And then we'll start to air stuff like this. Let's since you guys are now assigned, let's put that one aside for the moment, if that's okay. And you'll have an hour next time or whatever, to sort of lead the discussion, present your outline, lead the discussion, get feedback, all blah blah blah. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so let's keep going on this roll. Let's go move up let's go up the list. We just got this one taken care of, check. Let's go to, how we're going to fit career pathways, training, opportunity for the Bobos, whatever we want to call it. And again, this is what I do for a living, so I'm not really making fun of it. Who wants to take this on, basically? I mean, it can be potentially be reframed. It might be reframed better, it might be broader. this is where Andy's point about frame it not just in education tools, but let's talk about opportunity for everyone, like that kind of thing. But
I mean, he's not on, but I know Herdman's gonna want to write about this.
Okay.
Because this is like his pathways is like his main thing.
Okay, so you're volunteering him, not me. I'm kidding.
I'm volunteering.
And Will, I'm guessing you want to be part of this? I can't see you because I've got only a few faces on my thing for some reason.
So that's possible.
Okay, unless you want to go somewhere else or you don't want to write at all.
No, it's not that. I mean, I think this is definitely an important part of it, and sure, I can contribute to that. I do want to get back to the framing and the core logic, though.
Well, you want to do that now?
Because
Yeah,
I
go for it.
don't think we're there yet, so it's sort of hard to know if the chapters are right, if the mission isn't clear, or at least it is for me.
Sorry. So I mean, I thought you played a big role in. I mean, I'd like to get a lot of the language from you. If you're not happy, go.
Let me just articulate this for what it's worth. It's I'll start with the sum of my fears, right? Which is that we come out of this pandemic and out of this process, everybody slides back into their old ways, right? The status quo doesn't change. I mean, that's where the political world is right now. But the Biden administration is not interested in revving up the pace of evolution in K-12 education. And I don't think they're terribly as interested they should be in even this narrow question of school to work transition. But in any event, I just worry that we're going to come right back to it. And we've already, before the pandemic, we had lost tremendous momentum toward choice, and we lost momentum. In fact, the whole accountability drive petered out, it died. And so, if we come out of this, I think we ought to ring the tocsin, that this system is, the status quo is indefensible. We can't settle for it. We can't go back to it. We can't pretend that that's all we need to do. And that the system that we have is obsolete, it's outdated, it doesn't fit any of the compelling needs that we face as a society, whether it's the moral need to drive toward greater racial equality or the practical need to raise the standard of competition, raise the standard of education generally so we can compete better with China. In other words, we don't, we have a system that's ill-suited to the 3 or 4 compelling national tasks that need to happen. And I agree with Andy's point that we need to tie the need for school change to these compelling national tasks. And, I just worry that we're getting away from, we're getting into a lot of interesting and esoteric issues that may have a place in this document. But if it isn't an urgent cry for, radical change, and if it doesn't call out the people that defend and prop up the status quo, then we've missed an opportunity for an ecumenical, a group like this that's, comes from different places on the spectrum to agree that that is the core of the problem that needs fixing. And then if you do have agreement on that and a requisite sense of urgency, we can talk about, okay, what would you do to enlarge the scope of choice in our public schools? Because that's one of the key drivers of change. How can we get back to a real accountability? Okay, give it a different name if you like, but that's huge. If we don't have that, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know whether we don't know if we're raising the standard for everybody in general. We don't know if we're closing gaps. We don't know what we're doing. And I think that the competitiveness of the United States against the new peer competitor is a big issue that can talk to people who are not, who are not education mavens, who otherwise might not be interested in the debate at all. School to work, it is critical, ought to be a critical component. Yes, I volunteer, Tamara, sorry to be.
Well, you can take this, Will. I
just, I want to see if I'm an outlier or not, because if we don't, if we aren't willing to call out the people that are blocking the changes that we need in this document, then I really do question its value. That's a negative framing, sorry. I mean, it's a combative framing, but that's just the way I think we move the dial. Otherwise, it's a well-meaning effort by smart people. It's going to come up with a lot of very smart ideas, which will be ignored. And
what would be an example? What would be an example, Will, of how you would do that?
Well, I'm just talking about, you know, in the opening frame here, saying that a group of people, you know, have come together, united by the belief that the status quo is disserving this country. It can't be defended any longer. And those who do, and those who block the changes we're going to propose in this document are, you know, weakening the country, weakening its fabric. You know, it's just a, maybe it's only tonal, but I don't think it quite is. I think you do have to kind of name names, take some numbers, you know, in terms of the teachers unions and the other sources of resistance. And also, frankly, the right, the ideology of the left is that there's only one way to deliver public education. That's through the old, you know, one size fits all factory system. The ideology of the right is you can't do any accountability because, you know, because of the ideology of local control. We ought to call them out, both out.
Right. That maybe that's what because you know, like in some ways, you know, yeah, like who are we calling out? Because I mean, you know, just to give you a very real example, and Francis knows this, like I'm launching a new network of international baccalaureate high schools in the Bronx next year, right? It'll have both the diploma pathway, which is a more traditional college pathway, and it'll have something called a careers pathway, where we'll have apprenticeships and internships, and Mayo Clinic is going to be our first partner. And it's going to be an amazing school, right? The state university approved the model, first time precedent setting, amazing. And 3 weeks ago, the unions got the regents to overturn the state's approval, right? So now we're about to engage in this mega battle with the regents and the teachers unions to get this school approved in a district where only 2% of kids graduate from high school ready for college, right? So like I'm ready to, like, how far, because I mean, if we really wanted to break the mold, but then we have, you know, then we actually have to take a political position, you know, then we have to put a stake in the ground, I think, in ways that I don't know. So I guess I'm pushing you, like I like where you're going,
Yeah.
but if we're really going to go that way, then, you know, how brave and courageous are we going to be in naming names?
Well, your story ought to be part of this report, because that's the way you do it. That's the way you illustrate who's blocking change. In another conversation, I'd ask you how you're going to measure the results of what you're trying to do there, but that's another conversation, and that may raise problems with our Republican friends and who have pretty much made toxic the whole discussion of accountability, standards and accountability. So, but, you know, I think that some of this has to be directed at, you know, to the administration. Some of it has to be directed toward the ideological opponents on the right who are creating conditions that don't allow us to improve the system and measure its improvement. So yeah, I think you got to call them out across.
You're frozen, Will.
Into existence in the first place, right? Is to note that there's a common ground and that there's resistance to the changes that the country needs on both sides, and we need to be willing to identify that.
So
Can
Kenya, I think you were.
I make a process suggestion? Like two things. One, we've been at this for an hour 45, and so maybe we should take a short bio break so we'll come back refreshed. And the second, we just get this question. I think it's worth, like, you know, positive, negative framing may not be the best framing, but like, do you name names? Do you call people out? And like, I'll show my cards. I think you sort of have to get anything done. Or not, because I think like that's the kind of thing we want to talk about at this point and really air views on, because otherwise people will go off and do a bunch of work. We'll come back when we have that conversation later. Does that seem?
Yeah, that's where I was going to head next.
Yeah,
I was
we
going to ask
should
Kenya.
actually wrestle that to ground. It's an important question, and there's obviously different views on this call, and I think like there's certainly reasonable difference of opinion on it. We should
It's name names, and
that
how
out.
much is this like, here's a positive vision, and how much is, I mean, it will be a positive vision, but how much is it a positive vision? You know, that where you have to say, you got to break some eggs before you get your omelet. So let's fine. If people need a break, let's take a 5-minute break. See you back at 2:49, and let's open them. Maybe Kenya, since you're the sort of person who's already expressed some concern about negative, positive. Maybe if you want to kick us off. And Francis, I know you often don't speak up, and then when somebody calls on you, you say something brilliant. So maybe if you want to jump in on this when we come back.
Could I ask for, I'm
No,
sorry,
no,
Tamar,
no pressure there, Francis.
I actually have to hop at 2,
I'm
so
back
could
with
we
brilliance,
take the break
yeah.
at 2, and then
Sure.
if y'all don't mind?
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I'm for that. I feel like we're in the middle of this. We should keep going. That's good. Go for it. Talk.
So
Maybe
I was
not.
just gonna say, I'm very supportive of the narrative around a compelling national task. I feel like that is framing that would engage me and others around, like, where are we trying to go as a world, and what is the function that education plays in helping us to achieve that. For me, I think that's more refreshing. I'm not, let me say, while that may not be my style, Walton likes some more contentious relationship and being able to call out actors. And so I feel like that if that is the will of the group, it is fine. I just think that I operate from a place that we are more alike than we are different. And while there are actors who may not have advocated for some of the solutions that we've wanted to see, I think if we present a more solution-focused agenda, that there is opportunity for us to be able to, make something different and change. The other two pieces that I wanted to flag around, like the global citizen, I think about the school to work to world. I put global citizen versus rural readiness because I think that's a piece around Chris's piece of what an F-150 and a 40 acres, like what a whole bunch of people would like to have now, or is it, we're preparing you for a global job? Like having both of those voices, or whatever the strategies that we're going to get there, is going to be important for the inclusiveness of different parents. One piece that we're not talking about, and I'm okay with people shooting this down, but I don't think we tend to foreshadow well what is happening in our societies and its interconnectedness to education. And I actually think that we are on the cusp of seeing some really dramatic shifts. Like if housing is impacted, that is going to have a direct correlation to what happens in our schools. If as we have more income gaps, like this is going to have a direct correlation on what happens in our school. How could we also have, I don't need a full chapter, just a little primer that is saying we have to be paying attention to these things because they will have a direct effect on the experiences of our children and our families.
So I'm just going to speak up for Will for a second. I mean, I don't think Will's not saying solution oriented. He's just saying you get to your solution by, you get people to pay attention to your solution by saying who's against the solution. But I don't need to defend Will. He's articulate. Francis, do you want to weigh in actually?
I mean, I can. I don't know if I'll meet the bar of brilliance, but I'll share the thought. One thing I'd say, which I don't want to get us off track on this, but you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I do think it would be worth having a discussion about this question, which is it worth writing something? Yes or no? Is this something that we're all committing to? Because I think the question keeps on getting raised, and then we gotta go then into the specifics of and then what are the chapters, right? I just think we need to have that conversation openly, honestly with each other and say, yes, this is worth doing. And we're committed to figuring out the what's and how's, but I'm not sure that we are all on the same page. And so that would be valuable to me. That's first thought. Second, on the frame, I personally believe, particularly in this moment in time of just huge divides, huge polarization. We can talk about the culture wars on CRT, but this moment of everyone is in their sides, in their corners, right? I think there's value in not exacerbating that fight in some ways, but thinking about the common vision that we all have, because the bottom line is our system is not working for anyone. It's not about, the differences between urban, rural, you know what I mean? It's we need to do better. And I think some of that solutions frame and more asset-based framing of what it can be and what are some of the bright spots that we see that give us hope and optimism that we can be on a pathway to some of that change resonates more with me. I would say, despite the focus that I've had for a very long time on just focused on how do we do better by Black, Latino, low-income kids, like there's also a moment of like, we need to, and I'm really influenced by Heather McGee's recent book on the Sum of Us of the solidarity dividend. It's not working for any of us. We all need to rally and come together to drive change. And like, what would that change be about? And I think there's a way in which we can point towards a different approach to this work. Right. So I'm just thinking a lot about that. And so when I see language like status quo, it starts to, it's the old fight, it's the old conversation. And I keep wanting to push us to a new one. And so, yes, let's be solutions oriented. I agree, Andy, when you're going to a fight, you need to have an enemy for it to resonate and to stick. But I'm just not sure who we're pointing to, because there's so much fault to kind of go around, and how to frame that in a way that still gets us heard. So that the work we would do together would matter. So those are the ideas that have been rolling around in my head, but I feel like none of those conversations matter if there isn't a commitment from this group.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Carrie.
So I just wanted to jump in to kind of echo what Kenya and Francis were just saying. If I can be frank, I try to always be frank. I don't think a lot of people, like at least for the lens that I view things through, like the parents and families, like I don't have a lot of time for drama and crap. They're out there, like they're in the struggle. They are like literally trying to survive at this moment. And there is so much going on. Like Kenya was just saying, it's housing, it's safer neighborhoods, it's environmental impact. Like this is one of like 10 things that a modern family has going on right now. And so like, I think if we don't take that into consideration and frame it in the right context, we lose people. And frankly, like, not to put Kenya on blast here, but like we literally got invited to go in and have a conversation with the Walton family directly about how this has to be, like, we truly believe that this has to be the approach to the work. Like, it cannot just be focused on one tactic or one topic. Like, it has to be comprehensive. If you really want to have transformative change in communities, you have to understand that education is just a piece of what is going on in the whole ecosystem of that community. So if we really want to do something that's transformative, we have to understand where the piece that we care about so deeply and we think could actually make the difference plays in all of that, if that's the audience that we're going for. And in terms of the framing about positive and negative, like, again, I just want to go back to, like, the world is very heavy. There's a lot of drama. There's constant fighting. There is constant friction. And I think that people drowned out a lot of that stuff. And immediately, if you go in hard, they're going to be like, okay, like they've got, like, it's easy to dismiss. And I think, at least again, I have the bias in my own lens here. It's like what people are looking for, especially when we're talking about their children, is hope, is hope for the future. Because if we don't have that and we're handing them like, wow, this is chaos, everything is terrible, this evil person, like it creates a lot of fear. Parents are already stuck in a lot of fear. Like, again, like I was saying in the polling, like all they keep telling us, we're afraid, we're afraid, we're afraid, we're afraid. They're looking for people to provide solutions and hope and optimism, saying we're going to come together, we're going to figure this out. Like, this is our best thinking. This is what we think we can do together if we can push past all the BS that people say, they tell us they hate. So I'm on team positive. If we're going to do this and move forward, if we can reach consensus that this is the thing that we need to do. But I think it has to be in context. It has to be comprehensive. We have to know our role and understand that we are a lane and we are an issue in the lives of families and communities, but we are one of many. And the data, again, I know a lot of you guys are data nerds. Like, ask voters what their top issues are. Where is education in that? Like, if we want to show like why we should be a top 3 issue, why this should be important, we have to explain our relevance and the interconnectedness of the importance of this issue so that people make that connection. So I just wanted to.
Chris, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so quickly, and I know Kenya's got to hop, so quickly, I just wanted to say that the splitting the difference on all that I'm hearing right now is we need fresh frames. Even if we're going to do the same thing, we need fresh frames. And that is its own work. Its own work to kind of workshop the fresh frames. So I agree with Will actually on a lot of the things that he was saying need to be important, but the framing, what's the new frame? What's the modernized frame of those things, I think is really important. Two, I want to say not all parents are in the same boat. They're not all in the same situation. And some of the most powerful and socially effective parents in some of the local battles that I see are not people that are living in the struggle necessarily every day. As a matter of fact, many of them are people that have a lot of free time to be thinking about how their kids are getting the short end of the stick, right? And that's a very potent social force. So we have to think about segmenting some of our frames too, or like, at least frames that tailor and customize to different things we want to do. The other thing is like when questions come up, like, should we be negative or positive? First of all, Carrie, you'll know this. I talked to Ben Austin over the last couple of days. He's talking to me about the polling around villains. And the only real common villain that they found in all of that was bureaucracy and politicians. Those were the two kind of like across race and camp and whatever. Bureaucracy and politicians showed up as not. So the way that I answer a question around do we go positive or negative or whatnot, and you guys I should tell you, I've been listening to Rules for Radical, Saul Alinsky this week. I don't know why. I just went back and picked it up, started listening to it. And like that question is answered by what you want to do, what effect you want to have. So if going positive or negative makes sense for a gain that you want to make, then yes. If going negative, whatever, it's all about the gain that you want to have. Like it's not about the means, it's about the end. So if going negative or if naming names helps Ian get his schools through or whatnot, I think it's defined more by the end than it is by the means. So I typically would say I'm the combative person, wants to call out, name names or whatnot. I'm also experienced enough now to know that, sometimes you go out in a blaze of glory and you don't hit any means when you do that. So
I actually think we're closer together than we think that we are, just to be transparent. One thing that I would say is if we could challenge ourselves Andy is much more politically savvy than I am. The benefit of having an enemy is it gives you a place to be able to target your efforts. And I actually think that we could potentially shift that if in all of the things that we do, we say, and if you were to start, the one place we would say you focus on, that allows us to be able to then give people like a North Star to be able to start with. For me, I think that's a little different. I think that could be exciting, even though we have a litany of things. If we are collectively saying, and do this first, it could, like, it gives you a political point to go after.
So, Will, coming back to you, do you feel what Kenny just said, that there's sort of room for both of you in a way that
Of course, I didn't mean to say that the thing should be wholly negative. I simply meant to say that either we got a big problem that pulls this disparate group together, or we don't. France said the system's not working for anyone. You're right. If the system's not working for anyone, well, then there's the most urgent thing we can say is that the system needs to be changed, it needs to be modernized, it needs to be broken up, and that the forces defending it need to be put on the defensive. We're going to need to organize parents, for God's sake, to do that, right? They're probably the most potent force. They're the only ones, frankly, that, are defending public school choice these days. So minority parents, it's not happening in the suburbs. And so, so I don't think there's a real conflict. I only meant to say that maybe moral urgency is better than saying negative, but that you got to have that the cause is big enough for us to call out the people who are blocking the necessary changes and evolutions that we need to see in our K-12 system for everybody's sake. And then to tie that to the national imperatives that, that everybody has an interest in. And it's going to be different frames for different people, Chris. I totally agree with that. But there are enough of them there. Everybody's got a stake in public schools. So that, I don't think that'll be difficult, and we can be and should be very, very positive about the fixes that, we get behind. But we got to get attention, and we got to put pressure on on the people who are standing in the schoolhouse door, as it were, on both sides of the
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
guess
Andy, you
I
wanna
think it's
speak?
less about attention. I think that's where we get in a little trouble. I thought Chris's, the way Chris sort of landed his comments was like the right, like, what are you trying to accomplish and what's the best way to accomplish it? And I do think there are people in our sector who just want to pick fights just to get attention. And that's like the whole thing. And I think that's like super counterproductive. On the other hand, you can get pretty quickly down a road of you're putting out solutions that sound very intuitive to people. And they're like, yeah, like who could be against that? And they don't get political traction because people don't like, who could be against like making sure kids get an equitable share of resources? That seems so obvious. And yet like there are like powerful interests that get in the way of like fixing local school finance. Who could be against like making sure kids have good teachers? And that if there's a layoff, we don't let the best teachers go. But like actually, like, you know, and that's the kind of thing I think that you stroll into like your average dinner party and you're like, oh yeah, it's obvious. Like, why do you work on such an obvious issue? But we all know that's like not like, and so I feel like it's picking our spots and making the indictments stick, because where the solution, otherwise, where our stuff is otherwise going to look like a solution in search of a problem, we've got to identify the problem. I think that's where like, or you don't get traction. And that's kind of where I like, I do think the road to sort of interminable education meetings in various hotels is this idea that lions and lambs will just lay down together because that's just what happens. It's not what happens. And I just think we have to figure out like, where are the places where like we need to say, yeah, this seems obvious, but here's the obstacle, and like power through it, not with an eye towards sort of political theater, but with an eye towards helping people understand this is a solvable problem, but there are people right now who have been interested in not being solved.
Okay, so let's have a
I mean, one of the-
timeout. Sorry, very wise. Yeah, Ian.
I was just gonna say very quickly, I mean, one of the things we've done in New York, and I think just successfully with our political advocacy over the years, is we move very much from the sort of general to very specific case studies, whether, you know, like in 2014 when de Blasio was gonna block Success Academy from opening up their middle school. He was basically blocking facilities. He was going to start charging charter schools rent. We literally went on the offensive, and we had like a whole an advertising campaign with the pictures of the actual students who were going to be blocked from getting access to a good education. And and we won over one. That's what helped to create the momentum to create the facilities funding legislation, where we now get $5,000 a kid in additional money permanently to rent facilities or purchase facilities. And so I don't know if maybe one thing to think about is to make this very concrete, is like case studies where each chapter is a very specific situation where it does become obvious, you know, why, like, wait, that's what it means. So that's what teacher union opposition means, or that's what political ideology manifests itself to mean. Like, you make it just so concrete that it's clear what we're actually saying.
Yeah, I think that's good. I always have case studies. Let's take a break because somebody wanted to go to the bathroom, and it's been quite a while since we haven't allowed them. So let's take a 5-minute break. Let's come back, and then let's address Francis's question. Do we want to write a paper in the first place? Francis doesn't want to write a report. No, I'm only kidding. Who else? Oh, John, you have to go first. John goes first. Sorry.
Yeah, it's like anticlimactic now, especially after Darrell's like,
Right.
No, all I was going to say on like the villain, I do think there is something about the data Carrie presented with actually some of the narrative that we've all been wrestling with for the last couple of sessions about, you know, the current system, going back to that status quo. Like that's the villain that, like, we could even use stronger language, that it's not that it just wasn't working for kids. It was like breaking kids. Like that was breaking pathways to mobility. It was breaking pathways to thriving, breaking pathways to just career life, just all those different things. And in creating a more hopeful, you know, sort of vision. But my only sort of like, this gets a little bit to what Chris and like Will was saying, like, at least what I have found is the only way to break through and get political attention and time and funding and reforms is to create a sense of urgency. And that I feel like hopeful visions are needed, but like the way to create urgency is to to, the only reason the Biden administration reversed itself on an eviction moratorium yesterday wasn't because of a more hopeful vision. It was because of an immediate crisis. And I think we need to talk about how the status quo was creating a crisis for kids that the pandemic sort of surfaced, but in all of its different ways, especially with racial identity and with in just because of the whole last year, but then also like on the outcomes and the broken pathways. Will also mentioned, no one in our group has mentioned this, but the competitiveness issue with China is like catnip for Congress right now. Like the only thing that got more bipartisan support than this infrastructure bill was the competitiveness bill with China that did include some education provisions. The ed reform space doesn't talk about that or sort of play in that space, but it is gaining traction right now because of a fear of losing out economically, like tools and a whole bunch of other things. So just know that too.
Great, super helpful. Okay, so let's oh, Carrie, you have your hand up?
I just actually what John was saying was super helpful. I'm thinking about like whether or not we could paint a scenario where we could kind of forecast out, like, if we continue on the status quo trajectory, our kids will end up, declining, this percent, or our, which is kind of presenting the picture that if we keep going down this path, like this is where our country is going to end up, this is where our economy is going to end up, this is where our communities are going to end up, like kind of making that the villain almost, like, and we're at a crossroads right now. We can continue to go down this path and this is going to be the outcome, or we can come together for this vision for our kids. Like, again, using like China as the bad guy, or using, the economic decline, but something like that where we can kind of forecast out, like, the status quo wasn't working before and was leading us to down a path to this doomsday scenario, kind of like what they do with climate change, where we're saying, like, if we continue going down this path, by 2030 the planet is going to increase in temperature by 5 degrees, and like 10 million people are going to, whatever that forecast, that catastrophic kind of messaging that paints a scenario that creates the urgency, was just what I was going to suggest.
Yes.
I just want to introduce kind of a countercultural part of this discussion. The status quo was working for a lot of parents. And I tend to agree with the statement that we're making. The status quo wasn't working. It wasn't working for any groups of kids. It wasn't working for most families. There were a lot of kids left behind at all levels or whatnot. But just in what we're tracking at Brightbeam and the messages that we're seeing in terms of how we have to form our content or whatnot to parents as we think about our different constituency groups that we are targeting, the amount of irrational love for the old system and getting back to it, and like the balls to the wall, we just got to get them back into the same schools they were in before, and they just got to get back to normal and back to what we had or whatnot, is so much bigger than we got to do something different. We got to think big. We've got to, as much as I would want that to be the story right now, I think even looking at LA to me is a great kind of surprising to me how irrational the love is for what they had, because LA was a shoddy system before, but apparently it was working for quite a number of people who are not very imaginative right now about something new and bigger and brighter. They're just like really trying to fight to get back to what they had, against what I would want them to want. So I don't know if that's important to point out, to say anything other than in terms of communications, as we're communicating with communities, we're having a hard time pushing this bigger, brighter future narrative to parents that actually see the real goal right now is to get kids back in school maskless, as if pandemic never happened, and just to go back 2 years. Right.
But I mean, all the more reason to make a strong case status quo didn't work, but rather than just sort of say
well, you have to make the case in a very strong way, because what their response to you is, yes, it did work for me.
Yeah.
I actually liked what I had. I liked my little, Oakland Hills school that I had up in the hills. And, I have all these fond memories of my little little baby's going to and everything, you know, whatnot. So you're fighting kind of an uphill battle with some parents, not at all.
Yeah, you're putting an interesting point on the table just in terms of like the focus of the, because like it does seem we spend a lot of time in the data on this in terms of public opinion, and also just a lot of time talking to people, communities. It does seem like it's like a bimodal thing happening in terms of like people want to get back to what they had and people don't want to get back to what they had, but they want to get to something new. And so like, should we aim our report? I mean, a little bit, it's like, so we can do this sort of comprehensive, the American education system, dun, 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 dun. Or we could like focus our report more on sort of parents who are like overlooked, marginalized, frustrated, like, and like micro segment a little bit. And, you know, these won't be actually micro segments, but they'll be like, you know, segments, the no micro part, I guess is wrong. There'll be segments, and focus on that. You know what I'm saying? Like, is that like something we should consider, our report or whatever product we come up with?
I feel like you have a big decision in that to make, because we have this tension between, should we be talking about all parents and all kids, and whether or not we've over-indexed on urban and of color and of achievement gap stuff in the past. But I think one of the reasons we don't talk about that we did that was because that was the groups of people that were the most clear that the system wasn't working for them. It wasn't just out of the goodness of our heart that we wanted to concentrate there. It was where the most opportunity was. And amongst privileged parents right now, if I was Randy, I'd be feeling real good about the fact that I still have a very strong core group of net promoters who just want to get back to the privileged schools that they had before, right? I'd be feeling good in her position that they're not yet completely there on alternatives.
So let's have Darrell talk, but then I want to get to Francis's question, because we're not writing a report. Let's figure out what we are doing or not doing, or whether, you know, I think that's a really important question. So Darrell, go for whatever you're going to go for, but then let's go to that question.
Yeah, I got to figure out its lower hand. There it is. I figured that out. So two things. I like this prompt about, should we write for the people who are actually looking for the way, versus should we write to convince lots of people who may not be looking for it, right? It's almost like whenever you have to run an ad campaign in Jersey, you got to pay for media in New York. So you're always paying for people you don't get. I think that's a good question, right? And I might be swayed toward writing toward the people who want to get it versus people who don't want to get it. So that's the first thing. The other thing I would just say is, like, I don't want to gloss over, because I'm thinking about this a lot. There are lots of other ways. There are lots of other systems that matter to people that I think we need to sort of make the case about why education as a problem is a thing that should matter to them with this. So for instance, if you live in Boise, Idaho right now, right? Housing prices are through the roof because all of these like tech jockeys from San Francisco like craft beer and want to get the fuck out of the Mission, right? Who here thinks they're moving someplace where the test scores for the schools are bad, right? Who thinks that when they picked the house in Boise, they said, oh, this school's in the worst neighborhood possible in Boise. The local score is 10% proficiency. I'll move there, right? So I just think there are like hooks about the current, you know, about the world we're in, right? About its problems that continue to link explicitly back to schools. Like, you want to talk about racial justice? You know, there's a reason why the schools are more segregated now than they were pre-Brown, right? Like, you want to talk about why you can't buy books? There's a reason for that, because we have a school finance system that's layered on top of that, right? I feel like there's I hate using this word, but there is an intersectional case about the role that schools play in these other ills that I think we probably should make at the front end of this. And maybe, and like, there are elements of what Will was saying there. I was compelled by Carrie's thing about like, here's what you get to, you know, like, to, you know, 10 years in the future if you do nothing. But I don't think we should leave this kind of stuff on the table, because schools in the shadows are driving so much of this behavior right now, and it's all bad behavior.
So Tamar, I know you want to move on to Francis' question, but I would suggest we got to resolve like this audience question.
I don't think we do
First.
right now. I'll be honest. I mean, this paper's not going to come out for a year. In a
But what
year,
if
the
it's not-
audience
but
is
what
going
if
to
it's
look
not a
really
paper? What if
different.
it's not a paper? I mean, like if the strategy is like we need to move congressional staff and so forth, we're going to come up with one kind of product. If the strategy is we want to engage a different set of people. So I actually think this conversation we're having seems important to figure out, like, where do we see the levers? Because the product will follow from that.
Okay, go
I mean,
for
this
it.
is like Howard Fuller's old admonition that, like, education reformers show up to knife fights with PowerPoint decks. Like, we should figure out like where, and I think he's right about that. Like, where do we want to show up with this? And I think that'll then inform what do we want the product to like. Is it multimedia? Is it a white paper? Is it a combination?
Okay, let's talk about that.
Is it something with
Yeah, how
Will's
can we rate
baritone
anything?
voiceover?
Yeah, how can we write anything if we don't know what the audience is? We don't
Okay,
know.
let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Go for it. I mean, yeah, go for it. What do you think? You're on mute.
Yep. So Carrie's a part of this. I think, some of the others in the field who do activism. I think actually my point is about these papers and these reports and these things that come out is I get a lot of them in my inbox on a regular basis, and I'm not clear what people want me to do with them. So at Brightbeam, our partners send us stuff and say, hey, we just spent $1 million or $500,000 or $30,000 on this report. Can you please read it? And would you please, click these links and do a few things for us? And we're always thinking, like, what did you really want us to do with this? Like, what's the movement in the world you wanted to see happen? Because that, if we were part of the original conversation, we could have helped you make it more aimed to a goal of some sort. But really what I have now is a long folder of reports from friends and allies, and I don't really know what the action point is, the handlebars that we were supposed to take and drive with. So that might help with the audience question. Like, yeah, we're gonna make a big statement about a positive version of the future that we care about or whatnot. To what end? Like, do we want politicians to do something with it? Do we want grassroots people to do something with it? Is there any legislation we want out of it? I mean, what's beyond making a statement and putting something in the ground, who do we want to move something with it?
So I'm a big believer, and this doesn't have to be everyone's answer, but I mean, why I do what I do in life has to do with shifting the Overton window, right? That's the concept that there's a range of things that the public is ready to do. And if your reform isn't in the Overton window, like, you're not going to have it. And the Overton window shifts. So gay marriage was once, like, in recent memory, like way outside the Overton window. And, for the last 10 years, gay marriage has been right smack in the middle of the Overton window. I dare say what's important about George Floyd's death is it shifted the Overton window. That's what I think you try to do with things like this. Like, it's not one piece of legislation, it's shifting a broad consensus about how people are going to start to think about what's possible to do. And that's why you kind of write reports, and that's why you want the media to pick it up, and you want politicians to read it, and you want sort of to filter down to the public. It's kind of about changing the climate of opinion so that you make it possible for some big ideas to move. That maybe that's too big and too abstract, but that's kind of what I don't know if I actually made that case to Walton when they came to me and said, would you do this? But that was certainly in my head as I proposed, as I said, yes, good idea. Let's have a group, let's have a report. You may all think that's worthless and you need something more targeted, but for what it's worth, that's my view of the world.
Well, I don't think it's abstract if it's backed up by, again, specific case studies or examples of what you want more of or things you want less of that we can describe in some level of detail where someone can go from the specific to the universal.
Yeah.
It just feels like, what are examples, like literally, what is it? Name one example of a thing
we get that in.
Today. What's that?
We got that. Check. We wrote down case studies. There'll be case studies.
No, but I'm saying, what would those be?
Oh.
Well,
Like,
I gotta tell you, from the activist lens, the last time, because I get a lot of these reports too, and like what I see is like, it blows my mind sometimes because I'm like, how much does this report cost to create? And then we're gonna have a panel on it, and then we're gonna put it up on the shelf, and then next year somebody's gonna write another damn report, same thing, same panel, same discussion, nothing happens, right? What I like the last report that lit me up as an activist that I was like, oh shit, like I want to do something, was TNTP, the opportunity myth. Like that, like lit me up. I was like, it was written in a way that was like accessible to me as an activist, got me emotional, mad, fired up, you know, ready to work. Like finally, it was like a light bulb, right? And it called me to action. It gave me something of like wrap my and still to this day, like they put out another like subsequent report and they're working on other ones. Like I still go back to that report. So like if we're gonna do something, like I would love to do something that like inspire and I don't know, did you guys have that reaction to that report? I know a lot of people were like, they still talk about it, like, don't you remember that TNT, like
I've used
that
it, Carrie, but I had to have like 3 phone calls with them to understand what they were trying to say. I felt like they buried the lead in it. They didn't involve us early on. I went through the multimedia website 5 times like I was on peyote. I could not, I knew there was a there, and I couldn't find what the there was. And I had to, once I got it, yes, once I got it, but it's a report about me having to do like 5 times. Like I thought it was drunk reading the report because I was like, there's a story here. I get it. There's something here. And look what has happened since. Did we turn information into activism? Because that report literally told you that they studied 10,000 classroom assignments and 80% of Black kids were getting assignments below what they were capable of doing, which to me should have been a massive rally cry around a critical point there. And the activism, the informed activism that should have come out of that expensive report, to me is a thing where it's kind of what's making me say what I say. But anyways, I don't want to go on and on about that.
I'm not saying like we should put out a report that's exactly like that. The problems with it, like I think we have the skill set in this group to kind of do it better, but the nuggets that were in there,
that's true.
Like for me as an activist, like I used it, like, and I used it to like point to parents to say like, this is the belief gap. This is the problem. Like we have people leading our classrooms who do not believe our children are capable of proficiency, let alone excellence. And you can spend any money you want on fancy buildings or fancy books or equipment or whatever. Like fundamentally, they think our kids are dumb. Like that, like being able to pull that out, like we could find a way to do it better, but like doing something that really like zeroes in on that problem, like that to me was actionable. And if we don't want to create, like if we want to create something, we should want to create something that's not just something that, you know, oh, we're going to put together a panel and then we're going to, you know, put it up on the book. Like it should have like a call to action. It should have something that moves people, inspires people to do something.
Will has his hand up. He's on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I think you kind of took me aback, and you probably said it 10 times and I missed it, Tamar, but you said that whatever we do is not going to come out for a year.
It takes about a year to do a process like this. I mean, that's in the past when I've done papers like this, and we have taken 4 months to get to really step 1 if we're writing a big paper. I mean, if we want to write a smaller paper, maybe it's different. I mean, this is why I was kind of, you know, going too fast for a lot of people at the beginning, but we're sort of we're at the first meeting. We're basically at the first meeting where we're making an outline of chapters. And then what happens is people bring their outlines. If we made an outline of chapters today, which I don't think we are now, people would bring outlines next time and we would talk about them. And then people would write drafts. You know, it would take like 6 months to just get like a draft.
How disappointed would you be if instead this group produced a 15-page document that was more in the nature almost of a, you know, longer manifesto? You know,
yeah, no, I think that's fine.
Stated a theory of change, gave some very, and I agree with Ian's point, some very good granular examples of the kind of things that are happening that people should be reacting to and should be energized to oppose, and on the positive side to support. In other words, you know, I think that the question of the scope of this report is really important. We ought to get to it. And I yield to Francis and others. It seems to me that if that's a possibility, it would be an attractive one to me.
That's
what about if we did what you're talking about, Will?
Let me time out, Andy. Let me just answer it. yes, that is definitely a possibility. I'm sorry I've said that from the beginning and probably just said it in the wrong way. It's fine by me, and I'm not deciding. It's fine by Walton. So that is definitely a possibility. 15-page manifesto is fine.
So what if we did both though? Like, what if we did the manifesto that Will's talking about, and then we also, though I think one of the problems with these reports is also like, and Carrie sort of gave a little voice that they're sort of just like, or maybe it was Chris, so they're one kind of one and dones. People do them, and it's like an event, and then people move on. And I think the better efforts are sort of things that are sustained. Like I would have loved to see with the opportunity gap, then like a series of like case studies and videos and other things making this issue real. Because I think people, not grade level, non-grade level content doesn't really resonate for most people who don't work in our sector. They can't really visualize that. And so like, what if we did something that Will's talking about, but then even some of the examples Ian's talking about and other, then we sort of had a sustained campaign over 12 to 18 months of continuing to roll stuff out to bolster that original thing, keep that pressure on.
I like that, because then you can, I mean, I think it's a good idea, because then you have all the time to make the enemy in the post rollout, right? And then and in the case studies, and if you're like interviewing parents or whatever, right? There are tons of time to put like bureaucracy and every other thing on trial as like a practical expression beneath the overarching sentiment that is in like the 15-page document or something like that.
I mean, in the opportunity myth document, Chris, where you said, it said 80% of Black kids were being assigned work below their potential. How much time did they spend on the 20% of places where they found it was working, and why, and what those ingredients were? Because for me, that's what I want the campaign to be about. Like, how do you, and I'll let you answer, but like, how do we uplift the exemplars of what we think should be versus reinforcing, anyway, yeah, like how much time did they spend on the 20% and how those were able to endure? You know what I mean?
I think the majority, like probably, if I'm remembering correctly, the majority of their time is spent on the problem. And, so they looked at these 10,000 assignments, and they came up with, the myth, the opportunity myth that the kids are. But I think what you're raising is kind of like a process question that fits my bill, which is, what do you want me to do with the information? And maybe a next step in that information would have been to say, okay, now who is getting it right? And can we lift them up?
Right.
And how can we inoculate them against criticism? Because you know what the other team does once you start lifting up the exemplars is they start attacking the exemplars. But like, it would have been a more full plan, right?
Right. Because I often find that part of the challenge, we don't dissect success. Like and
we study failure because it's the first part of making the case. But if you don't offer people something after you've told them what the problem is, you're kind of just a complainer. Like eventually they turn off. It's kind of like, okay, I get it. There's a problem. No.
Right. If we can do what Chris just said, literally, that is what this sector needs. We all hear problems constantly. But if we can offer real examples of scalable solutions, even if they're not scalable, but the practices, we can reveal them and the issues that they faced on a very specific basis, and have the manifesto in all the larger language. And that's part of a longer term campaign. That's what we've done in New York. And we're far from overly successful, but I think a lot of the victories we've had is that we've combined the sort of macro goals with very specific winnable battles around specific kids or policies that we wanted to get passed. Anyway, that's. I hate things like I hate things like the opportunity myth, only because it's like, yes, I get it, but tell me where it's working and how I can replicate that.
So right now where things stand is a 15-page paper followed by some case studies that we dribble out over time. And is that right? And who's our audience? So a question somebody raised a while ago.
Well, one argument, I think each of us has our constituencies that we want to represent or we want to think through. I actually want the activist community to be informed, something I have been calling, and my team hates it, infovism, information plus activism, right? And so for the people that we work with in the field, we constantly have to be having a dialogue about what does this mean? What does this mean for you? Like, how would you push something on this? So I just want to add that as one audience that I care about. Like, what can you do? Like, what can you do with this information? There was a great document in '86 and then in the '90s. A bunch of educators got together for a big document like this. And one of the products that they produced is, this is what parents can do. This is what community leaders can do. This is what church leaders can do. This is what politicians can do. So they had this big report that they put out, but then they actually gave you levels. There was a sheet for each of those groups of people of what you can do now.
That's clever. Yeah.
That literally, Chris, if we write this chapter, that's what I was envisioning. Like, for every significant institution we want to revitalize, here are your action points for what you can do. And here is an exemplar of an institution in that sector doing the right thing and how they've done it. Like, you literally lay it out.
I'm going to send you, I'll email it to you, actually, the document, so you can see what they came up with.
Why don't you send it to me? We'll send it to everyone.
Yeah, so what if we did, I love
that.
that idea. What if we did it, so we could do a toolkit, basically, for each of the major elements we hit in our manifesto.
Yeah.
And obviously, we don't need to do that all at once. We then could roll them out. And we do like a really good toolkit for parents, for activists, for educators.
Now you're talking my language. That's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, that's practical thing. I mean, I'm really interested now in faith-based institutions getting more involved in education. Like, Seton Partners is an incredible example, in my view, of a network that runs both Catholic schools and charter schools. But most people don't know what they do. And it's like, that would be interesting, probably for a lot of faith leaders to understand, maybe there's a way we could play a role. We could have a very specific set of action items for them, plus the exemplar. This, to me, is what's missing. And you don't make it just a paper. It is a campaign. Get Walton, particularly in particular states. Like, maybe there's particular places that we feel like if we get something done in that locality, it has, larger ripple effect. I don't know what Walton is thinking is coming out of this, if it's just a paper.
I think if we came up with something, they'd get behind it. I mean, I can't promise them. I don't have to promise you. I don't have the checkbook, but I think they are looking to us for, what we think is needed.
I could just say, as like someone who's heard their Walton, like, they're deferring to us. Like, don't solve for whatever you think Walton wants. Walton wants what this group sort of agrees.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Will, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so
You have your hand up, are you frozen?
themes now, because if you could get a bunch of themes around which we organize the proof points, the critique and the proof points, that represent sort of the big sections or chapters of this document, whatever it turns out to be, people started to think about that hard and outline, you'd have a better sense of what kind of document you're going to want to wind up with. I mean, I don't think you need to know exactly today whether it's going to be like the blue collar, like the working class thing you did, which is a big fat report that took forever to do, or the short 15-page paper that then is iterated in various ways. But it does seem to me, I hate to get through this day without coming back to the question of assigning people to themes or chapters or sections, because I know you want to do that.
I'm for that. I've been trying to do that for a week, but people.
Then we would have outlines to look at. We would begin to see how this thing could come together.
Well, okay, Paul, and then I'll go back. I mean, you don't have to push me very hard to go back to that piece of paper. Paul?
Well, I was going to underscore that and add one point. So just building on the previous conversation. So I was out for a period of time, but I don't know what is. It's like, so what's the meat of what we're trying to see
Well,
move.
Oh, don't worry, we
assigned
figured
you
out, we figured out what you're doing already.
Yeah, we
Paul.
already assigned you
Don't worry
the
about it.
6 chapters that we really get to meet. We're talking more about the other piece of it now.
Let's go
Okay.
back to the piece of paper and let's see if we can get
Yeah.
anywhere. But I think, you know, you're getting a
just
lot of
real quick.
resonance with me for a shorter report. And then these pages with case studies, and then these pages of like what, you know, what you can do in your part of the world to advance these themes. So, I mean, I don't, you know, I'm not deciding, but I feel like the group is, I heard some, you know, coalescing around that. So here's where, this is a long document, but here really are what I thought were the buckets. It's basically choice and some, you know, discussion of choice. Here's what we're not calling accountability, diagnostic testing, take your temperature, whatever. Here's career pathways, opportunity. These ought to all be framed better. This is just my lame framing. And then, you know, outside the walls of the classroom. You know, if we could take, if people think those are the, if those are buckets worth assigning people to play with outlines, let's make some assignments. It looks like you're speaking well, but I'm not hearing you.
Oh, no, I wouldn't, but I will. I like those. I think those, they're all good. And you've already got a team for the last one, the outside the classroom, right? Or I think you had some volunteers earlier. But I do think 2 other sections. One would be this international competitiveness, you know, the strategic competition with China and the role that the improving of our K-12 system would have to play to make us successful in that. And then, you know, I mean, maybe this is part of the outside the classroom. I'm not sure, but you know, just the point that this is something we have to do to make equal opportunity and equal justice real. You know?
Doesn't all that go in the big framing argument? I mean, it seems to me like you make a big framing argument about why, which has to do with competitiveness, which has to do with equity, which has to do with, you know, a lot of other things, opportunity. We all have a long argument about framing, but then you have to sort of say how, and these 4 chapters are getting at the how.
Well, they're defining the goals and stating the how. So I think you just needed. It's an important enough goal, I think, that it ought to get its own section.
You want a
It has-
chapter
it
on
has
competitiveness
moral
and a
heft.
chapter on race?
It has, not me, but it has a moral heft that's going to help drive this thing with at least with, you know, with the political audience in this
Right,
town.
but I mean, again, my suggestion would be that goes in a very robust, that's the first 5 pages of the 15 pages. I don't know, we can,
Yeah,
okay,
okay, well, just my thoughts.
yeah, we can write it and then we can decide where it goes, what it's called, okay. Others want to have thoughts on what's here and volunteer?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's just some big buckets. We may want to, maybe there's a Google Doc where we can kind of vote on things or whatever, but one, just in terms of accountability, I reframe as personalized learning, like using data to kind of meet people where they are. But there are other buckets like, you know, talent. I see somebody talking about teachers. There's also funding, equitable. So like, I think we may just want to look at, here's the universe of big buckets or big levers, and you know, maybe have a rationale for which ones we don't dig into.
And so again, you know, what I was going off was, it's especially if we're writing a 15-page paper, there's only so many you can hit.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, even in a 100-page paper, I find 3 or 4 is about the limit. So I think all those ideas are important, but the question maybe is, can we fold some of these things into other things, or maybe not? So how do you all want to proceed? We have 10 minutes left. My experience of groups like this is when you put stuff on Google Docs, nobody touches them. My experience is when you give people assignments, it sort of works, but I'm happy to go however people want to go. It would be good. I mean, we can have another conversation in a month and sort of start over where we were. We can start to take assignments around ideas. You can all take my document and add to it, subtract to it, edit it, if you think that's useful. I mean, my suggestion would be we sort of take assignments and little groups start to, you know, kind of think what goes in their buckets or something. But if we're getting kind of late for that.
What, two suggestions. One is maybe you recap sort of the key components so we're consistent with the chapters, you know, so it's the, you know, the problem, the exemplar, the, you know, so maybe there's the framing, but then in terms of just sort of stepping in, I'd be happy to step in on the career pathways one.
Okay. And so I'm sorry, what do you want from me?
Sort of a frame so that we're consistent in terms of whatever those chapters come back with.
Oh, yeah, okay. But I mean,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, what's in the chapter? Yeah. Well, I think right now, so I mean, my instinct would be, you're not writing a chapter yet, because we're not sure it's going to be a chapter.
No, but
If all we have is a 15-page document, then what you're coming back to us with, the team that's going to work in the next few weeks, is sort of how to frame the issue. Like how to frame the issue, what it encompasses, you know, what it has to hit, kind of like, and we'd have a sort of thorough discussion of the kind we just had here on each of a few things. That would be my instinct. Like, don't write the chapter yet. That would be a big mistake, because we're not sure we're having chapters.
Right, but yeah, just the outline, and even just like what bullets go into that kind of thing.
But bullets, yeah, what's in the you know, and sort of like how do you frame it really? Because I mean, I myself, I work on career pathways, and I wrote it the lamest way. It's not really about career pathways, it's about opportunity for Bobos. And you know, there's a better way to frame it. So I mean, does this seem, again, I feel like I'm in the position of railroading everybody to take assignments again. We can wait.
Yeah, I'm easy. Like, I'll write on the choice chapter.
Okay. Who wants to join Darrell on the choice chapter? We got a bidder. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like Francis chimed in a little bit. Like my view of choice was never as constrained as just charters. So I'm delighted to address the things that you raised in the chat. I don't know if you want to come in with me. I'm happy to pull Andy off of the bench because I know he gets frothy.
I was gonna pull Andy on this one too. Andy has strong views about what choice can and cannot accomplish. So,
or Francis, you can edit it, right? That would be great. You could be like, Andy and Darrell are wrong. Here's,
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if all three of us did it, Darrell, Francis, and me, I think we'd get like, because like I'm all for choice. I think it's super important. I think it's like it's a necessary, not sufficient predicate. And I also think it has to be tied into our accountability conversation. It's a key accountability strategy in pretty much every other sector of American life.
okay.
As a
Okay,
choice
so you
zealot,
guys,
you know, as a choice zealot, I pull Andy off of that project.
okay, so you
I
guys,
want Andy out of that group.
so you guys don't have to, again, no need to write a chapter, just like frame how we should frame the discussion. Like this can be simple to start because it may get melded into something else. Will, why don't you frame your imperatives section, and you can frame it, you know, you have your moral imperative, your competitiveness imperative.
Okay.
Once you just frame that, and we'll figure out once you've given us a frame where it goes. I would, you know, again, we can talk about that. So what's
Mark,
yeah.
I know you're trying to just get us to put our names again. I think there's a couple chapters, at least for me, that are missing that I put it in the chat, which are like, I keep thinking about the new frame and the dynamic shifts that are taking place that are kind of like bright spots that we want to hold on to. And this idea, I think, of parents as true partners in education, I think is huge right now and is like missing. And so I'm not sure if there's support from that for others to think about that. We've talked a lot about the role of teachers and like the reframed view of what teaching needs to be. I do think we need to say something about that. And then we can, Darrell and Andy, I'm happy to be a part of your crew on the framing of choice.
So let's have a chapter on that. So let's have a chapter on teachers, parents, who's responsible.
Well, because I mean, one of the things we've talked about is like the broadening of stakeholders and how this work needs to be done and a new way of thinking about that. So I don't know if there's a chapter on that folks have interest in.
I think teachers and parents, like whose job is this and who's supposed to work together and what are the partners, and somebody's putting in student voice, teachers, parents, students, you know, who are the people driving this?
Right, and that's where I think toolkits can be really powerful, right? Because you have a you know, in the last couple of years with COVID, parents have, you know, a lot more visibility into what their kids are seeing, and some of them don't like it, right? And so that's why you see developments like Reconstruction now with Kaya Henderson, where you've got new curricular options developing that parents can bring that into their home. And so like, those are the kinds of things I think that just most people aren't aware of. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know as a parent, that's a tool that I can now use that's out there, that I can, the Jewish community has used this for decades to strengthen that aspect of their culture, right? So anyway, like for all of these, I just encourage everyone to think about the literal examples that someone can take the great language you have to introduce it and then make it very concrete with something like, wow, okay, I didn't know that I can now put that into action.
Okay, so
I would like to be a part of writing something regarding moving our ideas around parent engagement from transactional to transformational. Not just how to, because I mean, the question I get from people in education all the time is, how can I get parents to engage to do what I want them to do? Okay, that's what I'm always being asked. I'm like, well, that's not what I do. I don't, hypnotize parents into carrying your agenda. Like if you want to engage with parents, it's got to be a relationship and you have to build that and trust. So there's a whole pathway. And I think that is like, parents have done it by force now, and it can be a force for good. And it's about reimagining parent engagement into a much more transformational, like, how do we do this work together, instead of how do I get them to do what I want them to do for me.
So Carrie and Francis, why don't you be the team that does teachers, parents, and students? Like, what's the, who's who in this game?
Can I volunteer to look at because we had this, I know I raised earlier this idea about like teachers sort of like revolutionizing profession, like what that means. Like whoever writes that, I would love to chime in on it.
Yeah, well, that's what we are going to do, right? So here would be the plan, right? Whether we're talking 15 pages or 100 pages, these groups will go away, frame things, have ideas. They will bring them back to the main group, and depending on how many chapters we have, or how many sections of the 15 pages, people will present to the rest of the group, and we'll all chime in, have ideas, and then the group will go back, reiterate, blah, blah, blah. The point is everybody is playing a game here, playing a role. And it gets easier if all we're doing is a page each, because for the 15 pages. The only thing we don't have covered, I mean, I'm going to tell you in a minute what we do have covered, reiterate, make sure I got it right, but nobody's taken on accountability. John Bailey is raising his hand, and who's going to partner with you? Some of you don't have partners.
No one. That's awesome.
You can write the chapter. Yeah, that's easier. And one of these.
You know what, John? I will work with you on that.
Okay.
So I would also actually like to help with that too.
Okay.
And John, I won't have time to do two, but I'm happy to take a look and give any feedback.
Cool. That's
and
good.
particularly, I do think this choice chapter and the accountability chapter should be somewhat tethered together.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd love to also kind of like help weigh in on choice too, but like
everybody will cross pollinate. Okay, so let me read off the bidding. Let's see if I got it right. Let me see if I can remember. So
you say
what?
Right. No, I was just gonna, when John says accountability, what do we actually mean by that?
That's what we're going to talk about when he comes back with an outline. We
mean test and punish, Ian. That's what we mean. We mean making people sad over numbers and bubbles.
It's 3:58.
Labeling.
Let's get this. Let's try to end on time.
We're gonna hurt buildings. That's what we're gonna do.
We're gonna have a toolkit for how you herd all of your kids in the gymnasium and do pep rallies on the test, and then question innocently, why are the kids so stressed out about the test? That'll be like the first part of our toolkit.
And then we rip up their diplomas in front of them.
Yo, can we make this specific meeting part of the media campaign? Can we like break the shit out like a Hollywood Squares kind of thing? Like, what does accountability mean? Test and punish. I think that would be.
Okay, reviewing the bidding. Accountability, John Bailey, Darrell, Carey. Big imperatives, competitive global imperatives and equity imperatives, Will is going to take a stab at by himself. Beyond school, the community is Chris and Ian. Parents, teachers, students is Francis and Carrie. And Paul, you're by yourself on pathways for the moment. I mean, people will join you. I can join you. So again, all you're putting together like a page of bullets, and maybe some examples of who's the enemy. Think about what have we talked about today?
I can join on pathways. I can join on pathways, by the way.
Okay. So I mean, again, let me just think about the elements, because that was a good question, Paul. Like what should actually be in every outline? How are you framing the challenge? Where do you think the obstacles are, right? Like not the enemies, but the obstacles. And what's your idea? What does good look like? Both with what does good look like sort of in the abstract, but also like some example of good if you have one. You don't have to follow that, but that would be, for a lot of these chapters, that would be a useful way to think of it. But if you have your own way of doing it, do it. Like I'm just trying to give you some structure if that helps. Okay, are we good? Have we said all we have to say? And we have assignments. Like everyone's happy. And we will leave. I see, Chris, you have your hand up. I'll get to you in a second. We will leave this question of is it 15 pages or 100 pages to be discussed. Would certainly be a lot easier for me if it was 15 pages. So I have no. Usually when it's 100, I have to end up putting it through my typewriter at the end. So, 15 is great, and 15 may be more effective in a day and age when no one reads. And if we can do it in 15, I think, and we would get 15 out a lot faster. And so there's just a lot of strong arguments for 15 if we can say what we need to say in 15.
But I also heard a consensus that wouldn't be all we do.
Right. Right. Chris, last word.
Well, first on that last thing that you just said, I think no matter what, when you start writing, you'll see whether it's going to be 15 or 100. So it by its own, it'll happen on its own. I actually don't know, maybe I'm missing it, but a chapter on something around the structure of the current system, if we're going to talk about equity. And in that, I'm thinking of things like Tim DeRoche's work, Marguerite Rosa's work, Ed Build's work, that kind of draws out what the system, like, assigning kids by zone, the way that money flows, when it gets to districts, is kind of like the hard mechanics of why the current system is inequitable and not working. So I would offer that as like those 3 specific people could be a chapter, I think. Marguerite, Tim DeRoche, was the third one? And Ed Build. Yeah, and Ed Build's work.
Well, I would totally yield to Chris the task of framing the equity framing language. I think you do a better job of it because you know the literature better. And
I don't think that's the philosophical equity. I just think that's more like the mechanics of the system, the current system, like drawing out how the current system actually is systemically inequitable. Yeah.
Well, I mean, my view is general is like you will want to consolidate buckets if you can. So ideally, like that could go with Will's moral imperative.
Gotcha.
Thing, like so you don't have to have like the cause and the cure in 2 different places. So maybe the 2 of you could sort of go back and, I mean, a lot of you are taking on multiple assignments. Sure. Kudos, but maybe the 2 of you could go back and forth a little bit on that. So do you need my help like connecting with each other? Do y'all have each other's emails, and you're going to come up with you're going to all connect by yourselves and come back with outlines?
Yeah, I think what would be helpful for you all is like, what would be helpful from you, Tamar, is like, when do we need this by? What's the format? Are we working off of one template? Like, send us all the details of that, of like how we should be working together and timelines and stuff like that. And then, at least for me, like I can connect to.
So I mean, let me just throw this out as an idea. Like in one, we're not going to get to all these chapters in one next meeting, so we could stagger it. Like I think there's a next meeting like in a month, or maybe it's 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I can't remember. But there's a next meeting in a while, and maybe we take 2 chapters that think they're going to be done, 3 chapters that think they're going to be done. Again, I don't think there's really too much of a template. I can throw out how I would do it, but I think everybody kind of wants to, in general, I'll send some ideas about how you might organize your outline, but I think it's just an idea. But I think it does make sense to pick who's going to be up next time, because we're not going to have time to review everybody's outline. So I'm thinking that the big ones should go first. I think this moral imperatives and what's wrong with the system should go first, like the why, and always in life start with the why. So why don't Will and Chris, you're kind of on for a discussion next time. And why don't we take another big one? Why don't we do choice and have the choice people be on next time? And let's see where that gets us. And then the others, we'll have a month instead, another extra month. But let's put a third one in just in case the conversation goes faster than we think. It's not the rule in this group. So we'll do the big why and the choice. And then maybe let's have the parents, students, teachers, just for fun. And then the others will have a little more time.
You're going to
That sound
send a
like-
summary of all this?
I'm going
Are
to
you
send
gonna
you a
say- okay,
summary of
right.
all this. This is
Perfect.
okay. Are you going to
Very
do it?
helpful.
That's going to be the question.
That's a better question, but yeah, actually.
I have to jump, but I do look forward to the follow-up note. I think that's gonna be super helpful.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. We
Thank
made a lot
you.
of progress.
Thanks,
Talk to you soon.